morning, sir.
Good morning.
Where you left off yesterday, you had gone to bed on the 28th, correct?
Yes, that's correct. Friday night.
At some point, you woke up later in the morning on the 29th, correct?
Yes, Saturday morning.
Do you recall, sir, what awoke you on that morning?
Yes, I do.
What was that?
I awoke to the screaming of Jen, Jen, Jen. So when I woke up, I thought there was somebody in my bedroom. I snapped up out of bed. What the hell's going on? Looking around the room, realized my wife was actually on the phone.
The screaming that you heard, how loud?
It was loud enough to wake me up from a dead sleep. I could hear it. It was loud. Obviously, I was laying in bed, realizing after my wife was laying right next to me on the phone. But it was a loud Jen. It was repetitive.
Do you know approximately what time that was?
Yeah, shortly before 5 a.m.
Did you recognize the voice that you heard scream?
I did not recognize the voice.
As far as that phone conversation was concerned, could you hear both sides of that conversation?
Yes, I could.
That was based on the volume of the person speaking on the other end, correct?
Correct.
Eventually, were you able to recognize or identify the voice on the other end of your wife's conversation?
Yes, I asked my wife, what the hell is going, after I woke up and popped up, looking around the room to find out who's in my bedroom, assuming it was a kid, one of my kids screaming. I asked my wife, what is going on? I could hear her saying, I'm on the phone with Karen. She can't find John.
From the course of that conversation, can you use it while you were in your bedroom? Is that correct?
Yeah, that conversation continued for a couple minutes. I could hear the dialogue, and then again, right back to Jen, the repeating of my wife's name again.
As far as the dialogue was concerned, specifically from defendant Ms. Reed's perspective, what, if anything, do you recall about that?
She didn't know where John was, and the last time she saw him was at the waterfall.
And about how long did that initial phone call or that initial conversation between your wife and the defendant go on?
When I woke up, minute and a half, 2 minutes, I don't know the exact time.
After
Give or take.
Recall how that conversation ended? Hang up or
Yes, they hung up the phone. I was laying in the bed. My wife was next to me. I think my wife immediately called somebody else, was calling friends that lived near the waterfall that happened to be out that evening. She started making those phone calls.
as your wife was making those phone calls, what, if anything, did you say to her? Objection.
What, if anything, did he say to her?
Yes.
To,
No, I'm not going to let you testify to that. Next question.
With respect to the defendant's statement, the last time she saw Mr. O'Keefe was at the waterfall, what, if anything, occurred to you in reference?
in reference to her saying she last saw him at the waterfall, I then told my wife, what are you talking about?
So that was not what she said, sir, but I think Mr. Lally asked you why. Gathered from that.
She was crazy
Why was it?
because I saw her vehicle. I saw the black SUV arrive to the 34 Fairview that morning.
You had overheard the conversation from Mr. O'Keefe's wife the night previous, correct?
That's correct.
So what happened then?
I told my wife, what are you talking about? She was at,
Not what she said to you, why.
all right, sorry.
It's hard. Ask the question, Mr. Lally, so that he can answer it properly.
So your wife made some phone calls in your presence, correct?
Yes, she did.
Following those phone conversations, what, if any, other conversations did she have with the defendant that morning?
There were multiple calls. I don't recall what calls were made, what time, but the next call, we were informing the defendant that, wait, we saw your car. We saw you come to 34 Fairview. You guys were there. And I heard the response of, I don't remember. I don't remember going there.
And what, if any, other conversation do you recall in subsequent phone conversations that you overheard from the defendant?
At some moment, as I said, my wife had made a couple phone calls, and one of the calls with Karen Reed, she blurted that she broke her taillight, cracked her taillight, something to that effect while Jen and I were still in the bedroom and she was on the phone.
As your wife, when you were in the bedroom and your wife was on the phone, what, if anything, would you?
After my wife had made a few calls, we were completely confused on where the hell John was. The thought process in our head at that moment was we knew that John had mentioned that he was potentially going to be meeting up with another person. So we called that individual, my wife called that individual to see if by chance, again, confused, left at the waterfall. We saw them at the house. Did John not go with her? Did what, get out of the car? Did he go somewhere else? So we proceeded to call a couple other people that we thought he possibly might have met up with, or another individual.
From those other phone calls that you observed your wife making at any point in time, other than a conversation with the defendant, did you observe her to have any conversation with anybody?
You're asking if my wife did?
What I'm asking is not to any content or anything like that, but your wife made phone calls, correct?
That is correct.
When she made those phone calls, did you observe her conversing with anybody on the phone?
No, she did not speak to anybody. Nobody answered any of our calls.
At some point, did you yourself reach out to Mr. O'Keefe?
Yes, I did. I know I texted him, and I think I called him as well. Pretty much, where the hell are you? I think it was when Karen Reed and my wife were leaving my house. I think I responded, where the hell are you? Now Karen and Jen are out looking for you.
In regard to those text messages, did you receive any response from Mr. O'Keefe?
I did not.
With regard to those, you had Mr. O'Keefe programmed at home, is that correct?
Yes, I did.
And you would have prior conversations with him via text message and phone using that number that you had programmed.
Yes,
So no response to the text as far as call that you placed to Mr. O'Keefe. Did he answer? Did you speak with him at all?
I did not speak to Mr. O'Keefe.
Now, at some point, you and your wife proceed downstairs.
My wife proceeded downstairs. I remained in the bedroom.
What is the next thing that you remember occurring now?
I was getting dressed. I put my jeans on. My wife went downstairs. She was going to make a coffee. My wife and I were proceeding to leave. We were going to leave our house and make a drive to the house of the gentleman that my wife was calling that we possibly thought John could have met up with. And within that moment, again, I don't know the exact time, I then heard yelling out in my front yard.
And when you heard the yelling in your yard,
Realized it was Karen Reed, and I told my wife to please tell her to shut up. She's going to wake up the whole neighborhood.
where is it, or when is this in relation to that first call when you were shoot up on?
At least a half hour, give or take. Again, I don't know the exact time.
Now, at any point after you hear the yelling out front, you hear the defendant yelling out front, what was she yelling at that?
Again, repeated. She, for some reason, kept repeating my wife's name. I don't know if she got all the way to my doorway or my wife walked out, but my wife had said I was actually relieved because I was like, not thinking what happened to John. I was thinking he was on somebody's couch. So I was like, good, I'm not going to look for him, thinking my wife was going to go. My wife said she's going to go with Karen to go find John.
And at any point in time that morning, when the defendant arrived,
Did not go outside. I did look out the blinds of my bedroom window, which is the closest to the driveway.
what, if anything, did you see when you looked out?
Saw Karen's car in my driveway.
Did you see defendant Ms. Reed anywhere outside as well?
I don't recall physically seeing her. I saw the vehicle. I don't recall seeing her directly, making any physical contact as far as seeing her.
What, if any, concerns did you have in reference to your wife going out with Ms. Reed at that particular time?
I had mentioned to my wife before she was leaving the house,
Now, I'll allow this. What were your concerns?
my concerns were she was going to be driving with Miss Reed in their vehicle, in Miss Reed's vehicle. My concerns were that she had a broken taillight. What I thought by a broken taillight was that her taillight was out, meaning there was no light. I didn't think it was a bright idea to be driving around with no physical light on the taillight
Particularly given the weather, is that fair?
because of the weather, correct?
Your wife then leaves with, is that correct?
That is correct.
Happen to see who got in where as far as the car who was driving when they.
I did not see that, no.
Now, was that within the time frame that you were describing before, about a half hour after you hear the initial call?
Yes, from Miss Reed arriving at my house was, yes, half hour or so after the initial call. And it wasn't long after before they proceeded to leave.
At this time that you're looking out from the blinds into the defendant's car and the defendant outside, was it light out? Was it dark out? What are we talking about?
It was dark out.
So they leave and you're home with the 4 children, correct?
That is correct.
When was the next time that you spoke to your wife?
The next time I spoke to my wife was an hour later. I received a phone call from her. I don't know the exact time, but I'm going to say about an hour.
And without reference to much of the content of that, all I'm really asking for is, what, if any, indication did she give you as to where she was?
She indicated they found John and at Fairview.
Upon receiving that information, where did
I proceeded to finish getting dressed and drove over to Fairview.
when you got to Fairview, what, if anything, did you see when you arrived?
When I got to Fairview, I had come down through the Chapman Street entrance. And as I proceeded down the hill towards the Albert residence, I noticed all the first responders, fire engine, et cetera, police cars. I realized I was not going to be able to get to the Albert residence because it was all blocking the street. So I backtracked, turned around, went back up to the top to Chapman, took a left down Spring Lane, which is a parallel street to Fairview, and came down Spring Lane to Cedar Crest onto Fairview so I could get to the Albert household.
Now, during your drive from your home over to Fairview and doing all that sort of turning around, what were the roads like?
It was snowing, careful driving.
The snowing that you observed that morning when you drove from your house to Fairview, what was that like in relation to the snowing that you observed when you were driving home from Fairview? Hours before?
Much thicker snow, much more snow on the ground, much more snow to wipe off my car. And again, I had to drive slow.
Now, when you come around to the other side, as far as the first responders, you mentioned police cruisers and a fire truck, is that right?
Yeah, there might have been an ambulance there as well, but yes.
Do you recall specifically seeing an ambulance?
I do recall seeing an ambulance. I don't know if I saw it when I came down or if I saw it when I eventually parked the car, but I do recall seeing an ambulance.
When you car? Where did you?
I proceeded on to Fairview and I parked the car along the side of the road because there was another vehicle in front of me. I believe the other vehicle might have been blocking the driveway, but there was another vehicle right on the side of the road as well.
Now, in addition to the other vehicles, as far as cruisers, fire truck, or whatever, first responders, what if any other vehicles, or who, if anyone else, did you see outside?
It ended up being Kerry Roberts' vehicle was parked as I was at the driveway. Ford Explorer, I think it was.
Again, without any reference to the content of the conversation, did you have any conversation with Ms. Roberts at that time?
Yes, I did.
Did you know Ms. Roberts at that time?
I knew who she was. Didn't really have a relationship with her, but I knew who she was.
How did you know?
Friends through the town. She did live in the Ponkapog neighborhood, though I believe she moved in and we moved out shortly after. I don't know the actual time period. Her kids were a couple of years younger. One was 1 year younger than my child, so I knew who her child was through being the grade beneath my youngest child through soccer.
Just to be clear, when you talk about the Ponkapog neighborhood, that's where you used to live on Sutcliffe and where Mr. lived in the house that was for.
Yes, that's correct.
So then after your conversation with Ms. Roberts, about how long was that conversation?
Oh, that was a brief conversation. She informed me that she was going to pick up she informed me Karen was going, she was dropping Karen off back at the house. She was going to the hospital and she was going to pick up John's parents in Braintree. I told her I would come with her to pick up the parents. I said the road conditions were pretty bad, and just for safety reasons, I thought I would go with her, help her go pick up the parents. She informed me that Jen was in the house. Jen is waiting to be interviewed by the police.
So where did you go from there?
I then proceeded to the front door of 34 Fairview.
When you got inside, if anyone was.
When I got to the front door, it was my wife, Brian Albert, Nicole Albert, and Officer Lank.
When you came in, can you describe, starting with your wife, Jennifer McCabe, can you describe her demeanor when you first came into the house?
Shocked. Just face was drawn, just in awe. All three of them were just looking with a drawn face of, I'm walking and going, what the hell is going on?
Just to be clear, by all three of them, you mean your wife, Brian Albert, Nicole Albert?
Correct.
Just turning back briefly to the phone conversation that you had from your wife, which led you to come over to Fairview. How would you describe her demeanor on that phone call?
Matt, we found John at Fairview. It was a quick conversation. I didn't get any details.
Now, at some point while you were at the house, did you speak to, you mentioned Officer Lank was there, is that correct?
That's correct.
If there was any other officers in the house at that time or any later?
At that moment, it was just Officer Lank at that moment. Other officers came in the house a little later, but at that moment, it was just Officer Lank.
At some point while you were at the house, did you have any conversation, or what, if any, conversation you have with?
Yes, Officer Lank asked me to step outside and we spoke briefly. He asked me about if I knew what happened to John. Obviously, I told him no, I had no idea. I'm just finding out right now. He asked me when I last saw John, told him I saw him at the waterfall. We saw him at the bar. Haven't seen him. I believe, again, heat of the moment, I believe I said we saw his vehicle out front, but we never saw John.
Now, at the house on Fairview, about how long were you there that
I'm going to say give it at least 4 hours
from the time that you got there?
from the time I got there, yes.
And where did you go?
I left Fairview. I went back to my house on Jen and I's house, home.
As your children were still there, is that correct?
My children were all.
At some point after you arrived home, who, if anyone else, as far as police officers or anybody like that, came to your home that day?
2 Mass State police officers came to my house.
Did you speak with those officers?
Yes, I did.
Troopers from the state, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
As far as the troopers that you spoke to, do you recall what their names were?
Yes, Trooper Michael Proctor, Trooper Yuri Buchanan. If I said it right.
Probably closer. Now, on that date of January 29th, had you met either Proctor or?
I had never met them.
Where did they speak with you in the house?
They first came in the house and informed me they were going to interview my wife, asked me to leave the room. I went up to my bedroom.
And at some point, did they interview you as well?
Yes, they did.
Where was your wife when you?
I think she wasn't in the room with me. I think she went upstairs. As I said, my kids were home. I don't know if she went in the kids' bedroom to wake them up. I don't know what she was
in the
doing.
room when they interviewed, right?
No, she was not.
In addition to the troopers came over to your house, your brother-in-law, Brian Albert, came over at any point in time around this?
Yes, he did.
Did he speak with those troopers as well?
Yes, he did.
Where were you and your wife when the troopers were speaking to Mr. Albert?
I was still upstairs in the bedroom.
Your wife, where was she?
I'm trying, she might have come up and seen me, but I think she might have went in the girls' bedroom. I don't recall if we were standing in the same room. I think she might have went in my daughter's bedroom. Again, my kids were starting, I don't know the exact time, 12 o'clock, give or take. So time to wake up.
So the troopers, when they were speaking to Brian Albert Senior, they were in the downstairs area of the home?
Yes, they were.
Both you and your wife were upstairs?
Yes, recollection.
Now, turn your attention to a couple days later, did you speak with any other?
I did. I only remember the first name of one of them. It was a man and a woman. I just remember Connor something. I don't know their names.
Where did that conversation occur?
I was in my first floor.
Those same two troopers that came on a subsequent day spoke with wife as well?
Yes, they did.
Same arrangement as far as where you were and where she was at the time that you spoke with those two troopers?
Yes, that's correct.
Sir, describing your wife's demeanor, you described her as being shocked. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Have you seen your wife display that kind of demeanor before, or have you seen your wife in sort of crisis mode over the course of your relationship and your marriage?
I've seen her in crisis mode. I would call it crisis mode as well in the past.
Typically, how would you describe how she handles situations like that, or what her demeanor in those types of situations?
She is very calm, very calm.
When, just so it's clear for the jury, so when you're talking about fire incidents in regard to sort of crisis modes, what types of scenarios or what types of incidents are we talking?
Previous deaths of my parents, my brother. She's the one that can get in the room, sit, relax, hold their hand, make them feel comfortable. She's much more. I can't do that. She's much more. So she's done that with my family, and she's also done that with our neighbor.
Nothing further.
Good morning, Mr. McCabe.
Good morning.
I'd like to start by discussing January 22nd, the week prior to January 29th. You remember that Saturday?
Yes, I do.
You had been at one of your daughter's hockey games that day?
If before we're saying?
Yes.
Yes, I was.
You wound up going to the hillside in Canton, correct?
That is correct.
You went with your wife, Jennifer McCabe?
Yeah.
When you got there, you saw Karen Reed and John O'Keefe there together, correct?
I was there previous to them, but yes, I saw them there. Yes. Eventually I saw them there.
I should have phrased the question that ultimately you ran into John and Karen together, correct?
Yes, I did.
When you came in contact with them, you and your wife, Brian Albert, and his wife, Nicole, who's your sister-in-law, hung out with Karen Reed and John O'Keefe, correct?
Yes, there was a big group of people hanging out together. Correct.
There were other people in addition to the ones that I've just named?
Yes, there were.
So you were with John and Karen for maybe around an hour or so that night of January 22nd?
I'd say, I don't know exactly what time they arrived, but yes, I'd say they were there for at least an hour.
During that hour span of time, they appeared to be enjoying each other's company.
Yes,
The two of them had arrived together, correct?
they walked in together. Yes,
There were no problems that night that you could see between John and Karen, correct?
yes, I did not see any problem.
Now, moving on to the waterfall on January 29th. I am not going to go through with you who arrived when and who left when and where people sat at which table. We're going to skip all that. I'd like to streamline the questioning if I can. I just want to talk to you about 2 or 3 areas. You would agree that at the waterfall, the mood among the people who were there was festive, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Everybody appeared to be happy and enjoying themselves, correct?
Everybody was enjoying each other's company. Correct.
Specifically with regard to John O'Keefe and Karen Reed, they appeared to be quite happy that Kaylee had been accepted into Bishop, correct?
John, I recall talking to John about it, and he was happy that Kaylee was at Bishop Fian. I do not recall speaking to her about Bishop Fian, but definitely John was happy about Kaylee being in Bishop Fian.
All right. You have previously testified that they were both excited about that, have you not?
If I did, I just know that John mentioned that he was out because he was excited about Kaylee being at Bishop Fian. If I looped them both in, then they both were happy. I don't remember what I said when I said it. I didn't put it this way. I didn't see her. She wasn't happy about it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm just going by your words, sir. As far as you could see, they were both excited about her acceptance.
Yes, yes.
They had just found out the previous day or so, correct?
I don't recall what day they found out, but I know that John mentioned he had went out for some beers. He was excited because Kaylee got into Bishop Fian, and he mentioned he was out with another one of his friends whose daughter also got into Bishop.
It appeared to be new news, correct?
Oh, yes. It was news they were waiting on. Yes.
Right, you hadn't heard it before. This was the first that you heard it, correct?
I don't know if I heard it, if a kid had already leaked it the day before or that day, but first I heard it from John.
But it was clear to you that it was really important to John O'Keefe that Kaylee get into Bishop Fee and go there, correct?
They applied. He was excited for her to go there.
It was clear that he believed was an achievement, correct?
Yes,
You could glean also that John O'Keefe felt like it was an achievement for him as well, correct?
Objection, Your Honor.
Did you glean that from him?
he was happy that she got in. I don't know what he felt it was his achievement. He was happy for Kaylee.
Of course. And he was doing right by his sister's daughter, correct?
I don't know what that means. I can go to any school and do right.
In any case, everything seemed good that night.
Everything was good.
There were no arguments.
There were no arguments that I saw.
John was drinking beer,
In my recollection, yes.
and you had previously testified that you saw Karen was drinking some type of clear liquid that you assumed was some type of.
That is correct.
But you didn't think that they were drinking much, correct?
At the waterfall? No, they were only there for an hour.
They got there around 11, correct? That bar is pretty strict about last call, correct? And you spoke with both of them during the course of the night, correct? Neither John nor Karen was intoxicated in your view, correct?
Can you
They were drinking. I don't know what the guideline of intoxication is, but they were drinking.
Do you recall testifying for the grand jury regarding this matter on April 26th of 2022?
If you have that, and I don't recall that question specific, but yes.
But I didn't ask you about the questions. I just asked if you recall testifying before the grand jury on that date.
I don't remember the date. I recall testifying before the grand jury.
If I suggest to you that it was April 20, 2022, would you quarrel with that?
Did you say would I quarrel?
Yeah.
No, it was definitely around that time.
At that grand jury presentation, Mr. Lally was there, correct?
Yes.
None of the defense team was there, correct?
No.
Karen Reed was not there, correct?
No.
There was no judge, correct? April 26th was approximately 3 months after January 29th of 2022.
Yes.
Is it fair to say that your memory about whether or not John and or Karen was intoxicated would have been better on April 26th of 2022 than it would be today?
May we approach, Your Honor?
All right, I'll see you at 10. Jurors, feel free to stand up.
I just asked you if your memory of your observations of Karen Reed and John O'Keefe from January 29th would have been better on April 26th of 2022 than it would be today.
Yes, I think that's fair to say.
And that's because your memory doesn't get better over time, correct?
I don't know. I would say it's fair to say, yes, my memory would be better that day.
On that day, you were asked by Mr. Lally, quote, did either of them strike that? I'm going to go back to the previous sentence just to put it in context.
Yes.
The previous sentence was from Mr. Lally, obviously you've had social occasions with Ms. Reed before, correct? Your answer was, oh, yes, right?
Objection.
I'm gonna let that one.
My answer is yes, I had previous. I don't know if I said, oh, yes, but my answer was yes, of
Okay.
course, I had previous relationships with them.
I'm sorry, I cut you off, sir.
I'm saying, of course, I had previous relationships.
The question that I wanted to direct you to, just to put it in context, was did either of them, speaking about John and Karen, on this particular evening, seem overly intoxicated to you? You recall that question?
I don't recall the specific question. That's the question.
Your answer was no to that?
Yes, if that's my answer, then it was no.
In terms of whether you can confirm that was the question and answer, if I showed you the transcript, would that refresh your memory?
Yes, of course it would.
This is 21 lines
Just-
15 for counsel. I didn't ask permission, I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Having reviewed that transcript, did I get the question and answer correct?
Yes, you did.
Okay, just a couple more things about the waterfall. I wanted to ask you about Brian Albert and Brian Higgins, sir.
Yes.
They were both there that night while you were there, correct?
Yes, they both were there.
And they are both pretty big guys, correct?
Objection.
Yes, they're good sized guys.
Did you see Brian Albert and Brian Higgins practicing fighting at the waterfall?
Practicing fighting?
Right. Did you see them square up in a fighting stance to each other?
I recall them grabbing each other. I don't recall them squaring up like they were fighting each other. No, they were playing a little grab ass with each other. I did see them grab each other. I don't recall a physical, hey, let's go duke it out. I do not recall that.
Okay, so are you saying, taking you literally, that they grabbed each other's asses? Is that it?
No, I'm saying grab ass. It's a figure of speech.
Okay, but what they didn't grab each other. They were in a fighting stance, weren't they? Didn't they crouch down low with each other?
I'm telling you, I don't recall seeing them crouching in a fighting stance. I recall someone grabbing somebody. I don't remember who grabbed who. I just recall like a bear hug or something. I thought I recall them doing a bear hug.
All right, so you recall them, one of them getting behind the other one and kind of straining them or grabbing them?
I think there was a bear hug. Yeah, that's what's in my memory. I don't.
You would agree with me that after closing time, Brian Albert and Brian Higgins were two of the people who went back to 34 Fairview Road, the Albert home, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
But before everyone left, before you left, it was announced around the table that everyone was welcome back, Brian Albert and Nicole Albert's house, correct?
Yes.
Karen Reed and John O'Keefe were both there when that invitation was announced, correct?
Yes.
You would agree that it was expected that Karen Reed and John O'Keefe would go to the Albert home that night, correct?
If they wanted to come, they were welcome. Yes.
And that plan would have been for them to go inside the Albert home, correct?
Yes.
Recall what time you left the waterfall?
I left the waterfall after midnight, give or take 12:10, 12:15-ish. I don't know the exact specific time. Well, a little before 12:50, but definitely 12:10-ish, 12:15-ish in there.
You were one of the last to leave the waterfall?
Yes, as I had mentioned, Nick Kolakikis and I walked out together from the waterfall.
Your wife, Jennifer McCabe, had walked out of the bar physically before you did, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
You actually met her in the parking lot,
She was already in the vehicle in the parking lot, correct?
and you got into the car to drive to the Alberts home, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
All right. So I'm going to ask you about the ride back to the Alberts home in a bit, but right now I want to skip to when you got there, okay?
Okay.
When you first got there, your wife parked your vehicle in the driveway, correct?
Yes.
Which side of the driveway did you park your vehicle in?
As I mentioned yesterday, I don't recall if it was immediately on the left, meaning the left towards the lawn, or if she was in the next spot over. She pulled in. I don't remember exactly if it was here or one spot over, but she pulled in.
The driveway at that time.
At least two. I don't recall if there was more than two.
If there was at least two, those two would have been parked abutting the garage area. In other words, would they be, let me rephrase. So there are two lanes in that driveway, correct?
My recollection is two lanes, but there is more space I know when we go over and we've gone over, there's more space to kind of park 3 cars to the right, correct?
Okay.
But we weren't to the right. We were either left or middle.
You were behind one vehicle, whichever lane you were in, or were you pulled right up to one of the garage entrances?
I don't recall if we pulled all the way in or not, but I don't remember.
So there were at least 2 vehicles in the driveway before you got there, correct?
In the driveway?
Yes.
Yes, there were cars in the driveway.
When you parked in the driveway, fair to say that there was no black SUV at the Alberts home?
Are you referencing Karen's SUV? I don't know what color the Albert's cars were.
Oh, okay.
Are you referencing their SUV?
Yes, I'm referencing Karen's SUV.
That was not at the home.
That was not in the driveway, correct?
Karen's SUV was not in the driveway.
It was not adjacent to the property or on the street anywhere that you could see.
Correct. It was not there.
All right, but you say that there was a Jeep in the street at that time, correct?
There was a Jeep parked in front of the end of the driveway in front of the mailbox.
That Jeep belonged to Brian Higgins.
I found out it belonged to Brian Higgins. I didn't know it was his Jeep when I arrived.
And it had a plow on the front of it.
Yes, it did.
It was parked adjacent to the Alberts property on Fairview, facing up the hill toward Chapman Street, correct?
Yes.
At the time that you arrived, that was the only vehicle that was parked on Fairview Street adjacent to the Albert property, correct?
Yes.
Your testimony is that Jeep remained parked in front of the Albert house, just to the left of the driveway as you faced the house, until Brian Higgins finally left and drove it away at the end of the night, correct?
That's my recollection, was his Jeep was out in front of the mailbox.
With the court's permission, could we display Exhibit 60?
Okay.
Ms. McCabe, I'm highlighting for the spotlight the front of the Alberts home. When I get to the point where the Jeep was parked, can you stop me? And you can adjust it right or left if I go too far.
Objection, Your Honor.
Have him use the laser pointer first and then.
Sure. Hope you're better than I am. May I approach?
I was hoping I didn't have
Oh, the
this.
other laser pointer.
I don't have one.
That's fine. You could, yeah.
The Jeep was right there. From the edge of the driveway, it's right there. I believe it was a 2-door Jeep.
Okay, it looks like part of the Jeep would have been blocking the driveway.
No, the mailbox the Jeep was right there.
Okay.
It was not blocking the driveway.
Sure.
The mailbox that's spotlighted there, would that have been where the back of the Jeep was?
Yeah, the back would have been right in the vicinity of the edge of the driveway in the mailbox.
I see, so it wasn't blocking the driveway at all when you saw it?
No.
It was facing to the left as we looked at Exhibit 6, correct?
Heading to the left of the house, correct?
As you testified, that Jeep was there the whole night. Brian Higgins didn't go out to move it at any point, correct?
I never saw Brian Higgins go outside to move his Jeep.
About 5 minutes after you got to the Albert home that night, you saw a black SUV parked outside the home, correct?
Yes, again, I don't know the exact minutes, but give or take 4 or 5 minutes.
When you saw that black SUV parked outside the Albert home, Higgins' Jeep was still there, correct?
Yes, to my recollection, the Jeep was still outside in front of the mailbox.
The black SUV was parked in front of Higgins' Jeep with the plow on the front.
That's correct.
How far or close to that Jeep was the black SUV?
I don't recall the exact distance. Again, when I looked outside, I noticed that my focus was on the black SUV, which looked outside would have been in front of the front door.
With regard to the distance between the Jeep and the black SUV, was it greater or smaller than the distance between you and me right now?
Oh, it'd be smaller. If I'm the end of if you're the end of the Jeep and
Let's
I'm
say-
the end of the
Let's say that I'm
left,
the rear end of the black SUV. You are the front end of the Jeep.
yeah, I'd say you'd be a little closer to me.
With the court's permission, may I walk closer to the witness so that he could give an estimate? And you can just stop me, sir.
I don't know. Again, when I looked outside, I was focused on the SUV, wasn't focused on the Jeep or the truck. I don't know the exact distance. You could walk 3 more feet or 3 feet that way, but it was out in front of the house. That's all I can tell.
You will agree with me that you've given conflicting information about where the black SUV was when you first saw it?
You tell me I gave conflicting information. You can show it to me. I don't recall. I've always said the SUV was in front of the house.
Right. When you said in front of the house, you meant that as you look out the front door of the Albert residence, which on Exhibit 6 would have been the door to the left, that's the classic front door,
Classic front door looking at the house on the main part of the colonial.
looking straight out from there, that's where the black SUV was positioned, correct?
In that vicinity, correct.
Right. It would have been directly in front of you as you look out that front door. Right?
Like I said, in the vicinity of looking out the front door was the black SUV. If it was 3 feet this way or 3 feet this way or 3 feet that way, I don't know. It was just out in front of the house.
Right. That was where it was when you first spotted it, according to your testimony today.
Yes,
But you spoke to Michael Proctor during the afternoon of January 29th, did you not?
yes, I did.
That was the very day that these events occurred, correct?
Yes, it was.
You would agree with me that your memory of where that black SUV was when you first spotted it on January 29th would have been better on that very day than it would be today, correct?
Possibly, yes.
It's almost 2.5 years later,
2.5 years that I've lived in my memory, yes.
but your memory does not get better over time, correct?
Objection.
Mistake.
On January 29th of 2022, when you spoke to Michael Proctor, you told him that you saw a black SUV parked to the right of the residence as you look at the property from the street. Did you not?
I did not. Can you elaborate what you mean by to the right of the residence?
I will just repeat the question. Did you tell Michael Proctor on January 29th of 2020 that you observed a big dark SUV parked to the right of the house?
What right? Looking at the house to the right or looking at the house to the left? When you say right, I don't know what you mean by right.
Is your memory exhausted as to what you told Michael Proctor?
No, not at all.
If your memory is not exhausted, would you agree with me that while you were at 34 Fairview, you told Michael Proctor that you observed a big dark V parked to the right of the house?
That could have been the second time I informed him of seeing the SUV.
Okay. If I suggested to you that was the first time, according to what you told Michael Proctor, would you dispute that?
Objection.
Is your memory exhausted as to whether or not that was the first or second time, according to what you told Michael Proctor?
My memory is not exhausted.
Okay, so if your memory is not exhausted, do you deny telling Michael Proctor that you observed a big dark SUV parked to the right of the house?
Objection.
Can you answer that?
I don't know if I can answer it. I believe it's the second question.
All
I
right.
told him I saw an SUV and parked in front of the house. Then I saw an SUV move further up the road, which looking out of the house would be to the right of the house. So that would be when I saw the SUV to the right of the house, would be the second time I saw the SUV. I've always stated the SUV was in front of the house if looking out the front door.
Okay, so when you talked, so you deny telling Michael Proctor that when you first saw the SUV, by the way, sir, is this funny? I'm sorry.
It's not funny, sir. Not at all. It's been 2 years of misery.
You're smiling now, that's why I asked.
You keep repeating the same question.
I'm trying to get an answer that you won't give me, sir. When you talked to Michael Proctor on January 29th of 2022, when you first observed the big dark SUV, you said to him it was parked to the right of the house.
Objection.
Last time I question, is that right?
That is not right. The SUV, the first time was in front of the house, coming out the front door. The second time it was to the right of the house.
We have to move on.
Gotcha. Oh, all right. You did not say that, but you did say that you were making those observations from the front door, correct?
As I stated yesterday, I recall,
That's a yes or no question. I'm sorry.
Objection, Your Honor.
Can you answer it yes or no?
I can't. I said yesterday, I looked out the window and I looked out the front door. I don't remember which order.
You told Michael Proctor that the first time you looked out, it was out the front door, did you not?
I don't recall what I told Michael Proctor on
Wait,
April.
You don't recall. May I approach you, Your Honor?
Yes.
Page 2 of Proctor's report, counsel.
So next time, just show it. to
Of
me.
course, I'm sorry. You'd read the first few sentences of that second paragraph.
Second paragraph.
May I approach?
Yes.
You had said that you don't remember what you told Michael Proctor. Did that report refresh your memory?
I'm not saying I don't remember what I told Michael Proctor. I'm stating what I remember.
Hold on a second, sir. You just told this jury that you don't remember what you told Michael Proctor. Those were your words.
Yes, at the point I'm reading, I don't remember the exact wording, but I know what I told Michael Proctor.
You told Michael Proctor that you observed a big dark SUV parked to the right of the house. Did you not?
At some point in the conversation, yes, I told Michael Proctor that a big dark SUV moved to the right of the house.
Moved to the right of the house? Is that what you just said?
All right, let me rephrase. At some point, there was a big dark SUV parked in front of the right of the house. I physically didn't see it move, so I need to rephrase. I can't say move.
Right, but what I'm concentrating on now, sir, is not what your memory is today or what you testified to the jury today. I'm concentrating on what you told Michael Proctor that very day on January 29th, 2020, okay? You initially told him that it was parked to the right of the house, the big dark SUV, and that you made those observations from the front door. Then you stated you looked out the front window and
Objection, Your Honor.
and observed the same big dark SUV had moved to the other side of the property, correct?
The objection sustained, you have to break that down, and I thought we moved on from this.
No, we haven't gotten to the second part of the,
Bring the document, I'll see it.
Oh, thank you very much.
One last question on this, Mr. Yannetti.
yes, with regard to Trooper's report that you have in front of you, right? It's II for identification.
Yes, I'm reading them.
You will agree with me that you reported your conversation as saying that the vehicle was first to the right and then moved to the other side of the property, correct?
Objection.
Same.
You testified before the grand jury regarding this issue on April 26th of 2022, did you not?
Yes, I did.
You talked about the vehicle moving from A to point B, correct?
Yes, I'm
You estimated that it was 50 to 20 feet or so that the SUV moved along the property line, correct?
Yes, again, I don't know the exact distance, but estimate.
You, at that point in time, you were asked to clarify what you meant when you said that the vehicle was first on the right side of the property. Do you recall that testimony?
I do not.
Do you recall that Mr. Lally asked you to the right would have been toward the driveway side of the property and that you answered that's correct?
I don't remember the conversation. Again, to the right looking at the house or to the right looking out of the house?
That's what I'm talking about. To the right, looking at the house would be toward driveway. correct?
The right looking at the house would be toward the driveway, correct?
That's your testimony where the vehicle started out, correct? And moved toward the flagpole the second time?
The vehicle started in front of the house and moved towards the flagpole, correct? Looking out of the house, it moved towards the right.
Now, excuse me. You told Michael Proctor that initially it was parked closer to the driveway or the mailbox when you first saw it, correct?
Objection.
Objection sustained. We were moving off of this.
Wherever it was when you first saw it, where was the Jeep in relation to that black SUV when you first laid eyes on the black SUV?
Again, I was focused on the black SUV. My recollection, the Jeep was still in the same spot, which we had pointed out earlier on the exhibit.
Correct? In terms of where it was facing, the black SUV was behind, I'm sorry, the Jeep was behind the black SUV.
Jeep would have been behind the black SUV, correct?
Wherever it was along that property line, you would agree with me that before the black SUV arrived outside the Albert home, you didn't notice any tire tracks in the snow on the street in front of the house, correct?
Before, yes, that's correct.
Before the black SUV.
Correct.
At all times that you saw the black SUV, first or second, it was always facing toward Chapman Street, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
It was always facing in the same direction that you say that Higgins' Jeep was facing, correct?
Yes,
That would mean that the passenger side of the black SUV was the closest side to the Albert home, correct?
yes,
It was the closest side to you when you were first looking at it, correct?
yes.
Now, your testimony today is you don't recall if the first time you looked at that black SUV, it was through the front door or if it was through a front window, correct?
Correct. I don't recall which one I looked out first. I know I looked out both of them at some point. I just don't recall which one was.
Whichever one it was, when you first laid eyes on that black SUV, you did see John O'Keefe in the passengers, correct?
That is correct.
How long a span of time was it between the first time you looked out and saw the black SUV and the second time?
Again, I don't have the exact time. I'm going to guess 3, 4, 5 minutes at most.
What you did in between those 3, 4, 5 minutes was you went back to the table or near the table in the kitchen dining room area where everybody was congregated.
That's correct.
You went back there to talk to people and socialize, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Then you came back to the front of the house and either went to the front window or the front door, and that's when you noticed that the black SUV had moved to the other side of the property, correct?
Yes, at that moment, it had moved to the right of the property.
It had driven forward, correct?
I did not see it drive, but it had moved, yes.
It had moved
So it had to
forward.
get there somehow, yes.
It was now closer to the flagpole than it was the first time, correct?
That is correct.
The flagpole, as you look at the property, not from your vantage point looking out, but as you look at the property from the street, that would have been to the left, correct?
Yes.
Again, it was still facing toward Chapman Street.
Yes.
In terms of how many times you saw the black SUV having moved outside the house, you would agree with me that you have contradicted yourself about how many times that it moved, correct? Yesterday and today, you testified that it had been in 3 different spots and then it was gone, correct?
Yes, three times I looked out and saw the SUV.
Right. Again, in May of yesterday and today, all 3 times it moved, it was moving further or farther up Fairview toward Chapman Street, correct?
Yes,
In fact, you've testified now in May of 2024 that the third time that you saw it, the black SUV was even past the fire hydrant, just about to the neighbor's property, correct?
yes.
But again, your memory of where it was the last time that you saw it, or how many times you saw it, I should say, would have been better on January 29th than today, correct?
Again, assumption, yes, it should be.
In fact, when you were talking to Michael Proctor, you had just observed the black SUV just hours before speaking to him, correct?
Yes.
Not 2.5 years before, right?
Oh, yes.
When you spoke to Michael Proctor, you told him that you only saw the black SUV in 2 different spots, correct?
That's what it says on this paper. My recollection has always been I saw the black SUV in 3 different spots.
And you just called it a police report, correct?
That's the name, Mr. Yannetti.
Now, since you talked to Michael Proctor on January 29th of 2022, it's fair to say that you've had multiple conversations about this case with your family, correct?
Of course, I've talked about this case.
That includes in-person conversations, correct?
With my family?
Yes.
Yes.
As well as phone calls and texts?
Yes.
You've also, since you talked to Michael Proctor, have had multiple conversations about this case with your in-laws, correct?
Yes,
That also includes in-person conversations as well as phone calls and texts, correct?
that is correct.
Since you gave that statement to Michael Proctor, you've had multiple conversations specifically with Brian Albert, correct?
Yes, I've talked to Brian Albert.
That includes in-person phone calls and texts, correct?
That is correct.
Would you agree with me that in terms of the changes in your version of events from what you've testified during this trial to what is in Michael Proctor's report, you put the SUV farther down Fairview toward Chapman Street now, correct?
Objection.
Your testimony during this trial puts the SUV past the fire hydrant, almost toward the neighbor's house, correct?
That is correct.
But however many times you saw that black, you'd agree with me, you never observed any damage to the rear of that vehicle, correct?
Correct.
Never saw any damage to the rear right taillight, correct?
Correct.
You'll also agree with me that every time you saw that black SUV, the vehicle had its headlights on, correct?
I was looking as we talked about it moving up the property. I was looking at the back. I could see the back of the SUV. The assumption is the headlights were on, but I wasn't looking at the headlights.
All right. That would have meant that the area in front of the vehicle was lit up, correct?
Yes, but like I said, it was further up the road.
Now, sometime after that black SUV first arrived, you noticed that there were tire tracks, I should say, in a V shape on the street in front of the Albert home.
That's correct.
Those tire tracks were from the curb in front of 34 Fairview toward the neighbor's property across the street and then back toward the curb, correct?
Yes, it came out, waved out to the cross the street and came back in.
The pattern of those tire tracks that you observed were consistent with the vehicle making a 3-point turn, correct?
Can you answer that?
I don't know if the vehicle made a 3-point turn. It could be consistent with because it was a wavy pattern. I've never looked at a tire tracks after I've done a 3-point turn to determine what they actually look like in and back out.
There was nothing about those tire tracks that ruled out a 3-point turn to you, correct?
No.
All right. You didn't see those tire tracks again until the black SUV arrived at the home, correct?
Yes, I didn't see them previous to the black SUV.
And Higgins' Jeep was already there before the black SUV arrived, correct?
Yes.
So Higgins' Jeep was already parked and stationary when there were no tire tracks in that area, correct?
I didn't notice what I parked my car. We parked in the driveway and I walked in the house. I wasn't looking at tire tracks, but Higgins' Jeep was already parked.
Right. You didn't see tire tracks at that point, is my point.
Yeah, I didn't see any.
At the point that you saw those tire tracks, there were no other vehicles in the area along the Albert family property line on Fairview other than Higgins' Jeep and the black SUV, correct?
That's my recollection, yes.
Okay, so now we're going to go back to where I had left off with regard to meeting your wife, Jennifer McCabe, in the car after leaving the waterfall. You recall that we left off with you getting in the car and starting the drive.
Yes.
Once you got inside the car, your wife ultimately called John O'Keefe along the ride home, correct?
John O'Keefe had texted my wife and my wife had called him. He was asking where to, I think he was asking for where's the address. So she called him to tell him.
And you knew that he was asking that because the Bluetooth of the car was connected to her phone, correct?
I believe the Bluetooth was on. Again, I could hear his conversation. My assumption is the Bluetooth was on.
You hear both sides of the conversation, correct?
I could hear John as well, yes.
Your wife is John, correct?
Well, yes, I was sitting next to my wife. I could hear her.
You heard John tell your wife that he was planning to go to 34th, correct?
Yes.
He had told your wife in your presence that he and Karen would meet your wife and you there, correct?
He said, we're on our way.
You knew, again, that the plan was to go inside 34th Fairview, correct?
Yes, that was the plan.
You heard your wife tell John that 34th Fairview's off Chapman Street, correct?
Either I was also talking, so I don't know if my wife was repeating, but yes, we did say off of Chapman Street.
You could have been your wife, but he told it was off Chapman Street, right?
That's correct, yes.
And your wife hung up with John, at least temporarily, but then John called back, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
He indicated he needed more specific directions for 34th Fairview, correct?
Yes.
And you heard your wife, or maybe you participated in the conversation. I won't rule that out, but between the two of you, you did give him more specific directions, correct?
Yes, we did.
Either you or your wife, and you can correct me if you know if it's one or the other, but one of you told him to go down Chapman and take Fairview as if they were going to Bella's house, correct?
Yes, we had mentioned go down to Fairview. You know where Bella lives, drive past Bella's street. The house will come up on your left.
Right, and I believe you previously explained that Bella was a friend of John's niece, Kaylee, and also your daughter, Olivia, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
That was a good way to orient him as to where to go, correct?
Yes.
Once you did that, John O'Keefe never called back for any clarification, correct?
Yes, not to my recollection.
All right. With regard to your state of mind, based on that conversation and the instructions that either you or your wife or both of you gave, you certainly assumed that John and Karen would be arriving at Fairview coming from the Chapman Street direction, correct?
That was my assumption. As I had stated yesterday, there's multiple ways to go, but that was my assumption.
It was an educated assumption based on the conversation that you had, right?
Yes.
I have handed you something. If you could take a look and tell the jury whether you recognize what that is.
Yes, this is a map showing Cedar Crest Road intersecting with Fairview Road. On the opposite side shows Chapman Street intersecting with Fairview, as well as other streets it's called the Cedar Crest neighborhood, in the Cedar Crest neighborhood.
Realize you don't have a compass, or does it appear to be generally to scale in terms of where the roads are?
Yes.
It appears to be a fair and accurate depiction of the layouts of particularly Cedar Crest, Fair, and Chapman Street.
Yes.
What is displayed on the screen, Mr. McCabe? Does that appear to be what I just showed you in Exhibit 88?
Yes.
That there's a red there. Does that have any meaning to you as you look at the map?
Yes, it'd be the location of 34 Fairview.
Okay. As we look at the map, Cedar Crest is up the top and Chapman is down the bottom.
That is correct.
With regard to the directions that you gave, or you or your wife gave John O'Keefe, if they were coming as you directed them on Chapman Street, would they be taking a right or a left?
If they went the way that we mentioned, they'd be taking a left.
Okay, so in terms of looking at this map, they'd be traveling on Chapman Street really from the left to the right as you look at Exhibit 88, correct?
Yes, left to right, correct.
That would allow them to take a left down Fairview, heading towards Cedar Crest, correct?
That is correct.
You would agree with me that would put the driver's side closest to the Albert property if they just kept going straight all the way to Cedar Crest. address, correct?
Yes, the driver's side would have been closest to the property.
You agree with me that your state of mind was that was the direction that they would go?
That's what I thought they would have, that's how I thought they would have come into the neighborhood, correct?
But you never saw the black SUV traveling that direction or parked in that direction, correct?
That's correct.
That would mean that in order for the V to be facing in the other direction, one way would be for it to make a 3-point turn, correct?
Objection.
I'll allow it.
So we're saying if they came down from Chapman and then spun around, facing back up towards Chapman, is what you're asking? Yes, at some point she would have had to turn around.
Or do a 3-point turn, correct?
She could do a 3-point turn, or she could just loop around at Cedar Crest and come back up. Either one.
The 3-point turn would be consistent with what the V-shaped tire tracks that you saw when you looked out the front of Brian Albert's house, correct?
Objection.
Sustained.
You were interviewed by Michael Proctor on January 29th of 2022. You had not spoken with Ryan Nagel, correct?
No.
So it's fair to say you did not know what, if anything, Ryan Nagel had seen in terms of how or what direction the black SUV arrived in, correct?
Objection.
When you spoke to Michael Proctor on January 29th of 2022, the phone conversation that your wife had with John O'Keefe that you were either participating in or listening to, that was regarding the directions. That was fresh in your mind on January 29th. Correct?
Yeah.
Those directions had just been given to John the night before or really hours before, correct?
Yes.
So on January 20, when you're talking to Michael Proctor, believing that John had driven down Chapman Street, you were trying to square in your own mind how the vehicle wound up in the other direction when you looked out the house, correct?
Objection.
Were you?
Can you just repeat that again?
Yeah,
I think I heard you. I just want to make
It wasn't
sure.
a great question. I'll see if I can make it any better. But you're talking with Michael Proctor on January 29th in the afternoon, correct?
Yes.
He's asking you about the positioning of the black SUV, among other things, correct?
Yes.
Again, I'm just getting your state of mind. Your state of mind was that you gave the direction, you or your wife gave the directions to John. You're thinking he came down Chapman, but you never saw the vehicle in that direction. It was only in the other direction facing toward Chapman. Is that fair?
Yes.
So you're naturally trying to square in your own mind, trying to make it make sense as to how that happened, correct?
Objection.
You can answer that. Were you trying to square that in your own mind?
I wasn't trying to, I don't know if I was trying to square it. I just knew that for some reason her vehicle was facing up Chapman. Are you asking? I didn't know what she did. I just know her vehicle was facing up Chapman.
And to you, that was the significance of the tire tracks when you were talking about, right?
Objection.
Was it?
If I recall, I said there was a V-shaped tire tracks. I believe the question was, could it be consistent with a 3-point turn? I said it could be. I didn't know if it was a 3-point turn. It could be because there was weird tracks. Again, I did not see the vehicle. I don't know if she pulled in the driveway and turned. I don't know if she went to Cedar Crest and turned. I don't know if she did a 3-point turn and turn. I have no idea.
All right, just one last question on this 3-point turn. You offered the V-shaped tire tracks as an explanation for what could have happened, correct?
Objection.
I had stated there was a V-shaped tire tracks. I didn't say it was a 3-point turn.
All right. You'd agree with me in any case that if John and Karen entered from Cedar Crest, you saw them where you saw them, there'd be no need for a 3-point, correct?
So you're saying if she didn't come from Chapman, she came from the other side, Cedar Crest, there would be no need for a 3-point turn
Because
or any type of turn because she was already facing that way.
that's right. If she came from Cedar Crest, she's already in the very direction that you saw the black SUV when you looked out, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Now, your testimony during this trial is that you were looking straight out from the house to the street. Again, I understand your qualification. It could have been 3 feet this way or 3 feet that way. But your memory is that the car was essentially right in front of you, give or take, the first time you saw it.
My memory is the car was right in front of the front door.
Yes. Okay. You were looking straight at it, correct?
As I had stated earlier, the first time I looked out, I don't recall if I was looking straight out from the front door or if I was peeking out through the window, but it was, my sight would had it lined up in front of the front door. So if I looked out from the front door, then it would have been, yes, straight in front of me.
You would agree with me that when you were looking at the vehicle from wherever you were looking at it, you were looking straight over the front lawn, correct?
I would have been looking over the lawn, correct? Again, I was focused on the
tire
vehicle.
tracks were.
Hold on, Miss Eddie.
I said I was focused on the vehicle. I was focused.
I didn't know that he was not done with his answer.
My fault.
Did you get your full answer out, sir?
I did.
You would agree with me that the V-shaped tire tracks were farther away from you than the front lawn?
Yes, they were on the road.
If you were able to clearly see those V-shaped tire tracks, you certainly were able to clearly see the Albert's front lawn, correct?
As I mentioned, I was looking over the lawn, but I'm assuming the lawn was somehow in my visibility. I wasn't focusing on the lawn.
I'm going to try that question again and see if I can get a yes or no. If you were able to clearly see the V-shaped tire tracks, you were certainly able to clearly see the Albert's front lawn, correct?
If I looked at it, it's a confusing question. As I said, I was focused on the road. I wasn't looking at the lawn.
But let me be clear. I'm not asking you if you looked at it. I asked if you were able to clearly see it.
I would be able to, yes.
When you looked at that black SUV and saw the V-shaped tire tracks, you did not see a 6'2" man lying on the front lawn, correct?
No, I did not.
At no point in time, whenever you looked at that black SUV, did you see John O'Keefe inside the vehicle, correct?
No, I did not see John in the vehicle.
At no point in time did you hear any yelling outside 34 Fairview, correct?
No, I did not.
At no point in time did you hear any scream of pain outside 34 Fairview, correct?
No, I didn't.
At no point in time did you ever hear any crash noises outside 34 Fairview.
Objection.
I'll allow it.
No,
Last question on this point. At no point did you hear any noises at all outside 34 Fairview that attracted your attention.
no, there's music playing in the house. I didn't hear anything.
After being at the Albert home for a period of time early that morning, you left the home approximately 1:40 a.m. or so.
Yeah, give or take 41, 45. Don't know the exact time.
You walked out with your wife, Jennifer McCabe, and two of Brian Jr.'s friends, correct?
Yes, Brian's two friends were joining Jennifer and I. We were driving them home.
Whether you knew their names or not that night, you subsequently learned their names to be Sarah Levinson and Julie Nagel.
That's correct.
You all came out of the house together, correct?
Yeah, I don't recall who was where when we walked to the car, but we all left the house at the time.
Directly in front of all of you was the front lawn, correct?
If I was to walk straight out the front door, yes, the front lawn's in front of me.
When you were walking out, the black S was gone, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
When you first came out of the house facing that front lawn, you didn't see a black baseball cap, correct?
That's correct.
Or a black sneaker, correct?
That's correct.
Or 45 pieces of red plastic taillight, correct?
That's correct.
Or even one, correct?
Correct.
Once again, you didn't see a 6-foot man lying on the lawn, correct?
No, I wish I did, but I didn't.
As you were walking out with your wife and these two other women, none of them yelled that they saw anything like that.
Correct.
Then you all piled into the vehicle, which was in the drive, correct?
Yes.
You and your wife got into the front, the driver's seat, and the passengers, correct?
Yes, I sat in the driver's seat. My wife was in the passenger seat. I had to brush off the car, but that's where we sat.
The other two women who were friends with Brian Jr. got into the second row passenger seat, correct?
Yes.
I believe your testimony is you don't know who was where within that, but they did get in there.
Yes, they were behind us. I don't know who sat in what seat.
Once you got inside the vehicle, is that when you realized that you had left something back into the house?
I don't recall leaving something in the house.
I'm sorry?
I don't recall leaving something in the house. If I did, I don't recall leaving something in the house.
You don't recall going back into the house?
No, I don't recall going back in the house.
If you went back into the house, the front lawn would have been directly in front of you from the driveway, correct?
The lawn would have been to my left and I would have been up the walkway to
Right.
the house.
Okay, and that's my next question. When you went up the walkway, the front lawn would have been to your left, right?
Yes, that's correct.
And coming out, you would have had the same view that you'd had the first time, correct?
Yes, it would have come back out the same way down the steps to the left.
And without going through all the various items that I asked you about not seeing on the front lawn, the speaker, the cap, the tail light, etc., you didn't see any of that stuff at any point the second time, correct?
Correct. I did not see anything.
Okay, so now you're finally back in your vehicle and you are backing out of the drive, correct?
Yes.
Is it fair to say that to get to your strikeout, is it fair to say that drop the women off, your plan was to head toward Chapman's,
Yes, that's what we did.
which would mean that as you back out of the driveway, the rear end of your car would have been facing towards Cedar Crest.
Correct.
Then you would straighten out and now you've got a straight shot up toward Chapman Street, correct?
Yes.
It would also mean that you drove the length of the Alberts property, correct?
Yes.
While you did that, sir, Julie Nagel never said, "What was that?" Did she?
I did not hear Julie say that.
She never said she had seen a black object, correct?
I did not hear her say that.
She never said that she saw a black blob, correct?
I did not hear her say that.
She didn't say that the black blob that she supposedly saw was 5 or 6 feet in length, correct?
Again, I did not hear her.
She never said that she might have seen a person, correct?
I did not hear her. You talk about in the car? Yeah, I did not hear her say it in the car.
You were right there driving, correct?
I was driving, obviously focused on the road, the windshield wipers. It was snowing pretty heavily. I didn't, but they were all talking in the car.
You didn't have AirPods in.
No, I didn't.
Certainly not the noise cancellation air, correct?
Correct. I did not have AirPods.
You never stopped the car because you never heard Julie Nagel say anything about anybody being in trouble, correct?
I did not hear her say it.
Okay. You woke up the next morning, as you said, to screaming, correct?
Yes.
The screaming was so loud that you thought that the person screaming was actually in your bedroom, correct?
That is correct.
It startled you, fair to say?
Yes, it did.
And ultimately, you learned that Karen Reed ended up in your driveway, correct?
Yes.
You could hear her screaming outside, correct?
I could hear her outside, correct.
She was hysterical
She was screaming Jen. She just kept repeating Jen.
in a hysterical manner.
Yeah. And yes,
She was screaming so loud that she was in danger of waking up the whole neighborhood, correct?
she was loud.
Other than screaming Jen in that hysterical tone, you really couldn't make out her words a lot of the time, correct?
Not when she was outside my house, no.
Skipping ahead to when you went back to Fairview that morning, it's fair to say that when you went, did you say that you went inside Fairview at maybe around 7 a.m.? Is that a good estimate?
Yeah, I don't know the exact time, but it would say give or take, could be a little before, a little after, but somewhere in that vicinity.
I believe you testified that the only people inside that you saw there were your wife, Brian Albert, and Nicole Albert, in addition to Officer.
So at that moment, that's who I recall seeing there.
Okay, so there were, and you didn't know where Brian Jr. was, whether he was sleeping, but you didn't see him.
I don't recall seeing him at that moment, no.
Officer Lank was the only police official that you saw inside, correct?
At that moment, correct.
Okay, now, in the days after January 29th, you participated in a group text exchange with 3 other people. Do you recall that?
Can you name the 3 people?
Sure. You had a group text chat going with your wife, Jennifer McCabe, your brother-in-law, Brian Albert, and your sister-in-law, Nicole Albert, correct?
Oh, yes,
I'd like to ask you some questions about that group text chat, if I might.
sure.
You would agree with me that on February 1st of 2, that was 3 days after John O'Keefe passed away, correct?
Yes,
At some point on February 1st of 2022, you were physically either at or near the Albert home at 34 Fairview in Canton, correct?
I could have been. I don't recall if I was there.
Do you recall watching what investigators were doing in the neighborhood on February 1st?
I do not. If you could show it to me, I could maybe reflect my memory. I do not recall that day.
You don't recall monitoring what troopers were doing? in
I
the
was not
neighborhood?
monitoring anything that the troopers were doing. If I had driven down the street, dropping someone off, picking somebody up, and saw the troopers, then I saw the troopers. I was not monitoring anything.
Directing your attention to 1:34 p.m. 27. You texted your wife, Brian Albert, and Nicole Albert, quote, "Troopers back out front, but in front of Asian house." Do not?
If I texted that, you could show it to me.
Now,
No, show it to him. Don't reference what it is.
you think this is my first try?
Thank you.
I'm showing you a document, sir. If you look up or look at it yourself and
Do
look
you
up at
have
the
glasses
document.
with you?
I don't use glasses, but I can't see this. So maybe I need glasses. I'm making it out. I got it. Is it a light?
No, he says he doesn't.
No, it's
wear
not. It's just dark, but I got it.
If you're struggling,
I'm reading mine, right? The middle one.
you take
yeah.
all your time. The time
Yep,
you
I
need.
got it. I see it.
Okay, if I may just grab that.
Yes.
back.
Thank you.
Reviewed that document. Is your memory refreshed?
I see that I texted what you said I texted. The troopers were outside of the house. Yes.
That's my question. This is a page that contains the group text that you had with Jen McCabe, Brian Albert, and Nicole Albert, correct?
Yes.
In terms of the question that I asked you, you now acknowledged you testified troopers back out front, but in front of Asian house, correct?
That's correct.
Mr. McCabe, what is an Asian house?
The next door neighbors to the Alberts were Asian.
So you mean that a family of Asian origin lived next door?
Yes,
They were the next door neighbors to your brother-in-law and sister-in-law?
correct. They live, if you come out of Fairview, they live to the right of the Albert.
Did you know their last name was the Chungs?
I had no idea that I've never met them. I don't know their last names. I just knew it was an Asian family next door.
You didn't feel the need to ask their names or try to call them by their names.
Never met, sorry.
Objections, Dave. You know what, Ms. Yannetti, let's come to silence.
When you did tell the group chat about the troopers at that house, nobody asked you to clarify which house you were talking to, correct?
Objection.
I'll allow that. Did anyone ask you to clarify?
Nobody asked me to clarify that I recall.
In fact, Brian Albert responded with just a question right now. Do you recall that?
Yes, I think that was on the screen you just showed me.
You responded yes, correct?
Did I get to see all the text or no?
With the court's permission.
Yes.
I'm going to give you the previous page in case you need.
Just give it, thank you.
I'll just give you one, and if you need the other, just let me know.
No problem. Thank you.
Again, just look at silently to yourself and look up.
am I to assume where you said Brian Albert said right now?
Yeah, would you like to see that?
So would that be the last one and then this is the next one?
What you-
I'm just making sure.
I understand. I appreciate that. You tell me.
Okay, thank you. Yep, that's what I was just looking for.
I may collect the document.
I didn't read the rest of it. Okay, thank you.
You
You're welcome.
agree with me that after you told the group in this group text that the troopers were back out front, in front of that house, Brian Albert's response was right now?
Yes,
And you said yes, correct?
yes.
And Brian Albert replied, okay, correct?
Objection, Your Honor, as of the reading.
Is that how he replied?
That's what it just said, yes.
All right. Now, at that point, you texted the group that you were trying to get a picture of what you were seeing, correct?
I didn't see that on the text.
You don't deny that you said that in the text,
Can you
correct?
show me the text, please?
Oh, sure. Oh, did you say you didn't see it in the?
I didn't
text?
see that,
I'm
no.
sorry, probably because I didn't give it to you.
Have you shown those both to Mr. Lally?
That's the next page after this one. I'm showing you 2 pages.
Okay.
Again, read it to yourself and look up when you're done.
Do you have a phone with a flashlight on you?
I don't have a phone on me. If you have a flashlight, I'll be able to see it.
Do you mind?
Does
It's
not.
Madam Court Reporter with Clerk. Oh, okay.
Very much.
Mr. Chairman.
All right, much better. I got it now.
Grab that from you.
Thanks.
Having reviewed that, do you acknowledge that you texted the group that you were trying to get a picture of what you were seeing?
Yes, I said I was going to try to take a photo.
All right. You agree with me that you were watching what was going on, correct, on February 1st?
No, I just happened to be driving through the neighborhood at that moment.
So you happen to be driving through and then you texted the group to tell them what you saw, correct?
Yes,
And you didn't just keep driving up the road and leave the area, did you?
I think I did. I don't, unless they tell me I went back, I think I did. I said I was going to try to take a picture.
Right, that's my point.
Yeah.
You weren't, just having seen the troopers back out there at that house, in your mind, you still weren't done, correct?
I was going to take a picture to show them, oh, the troopers are outside your house.
Right, in answer to my question, you weren't done with that scene, correct?
I think I was, because I don't know if I took a picture. I think I went through. I mentioned I was going to try to take a picture.
That's
I don't know if I took a picture.
You didn't intend to be done at that point, correct?
I didn't intend to be done.
Right, because you wanted to take a picture of going
I
on.
was going to take a picture to show them that the troopers were outside the
You
house.
want to
Correct.
continue to monitor what was going on, did you not?
I was not monitoring what was going on. I just happened to drive by at that moment.
May we be seen at sidebar?
Okay. Is there any objection from council if Mr. McCabe brings his own phone back in? Should he need a flashlight again?
No objection.
Why don't you do that?
Mr. McCabe, I'm going to approach this in a little bit of a different way to hopefully make it easier on you and me and the jury. I'd like to hand you, with the court's permission, the 4 pages that you've already reviewed, just to have you identify them. I may approach.
Sure.
Thank you.
And I'd just like you to take a look at them and just confirm that's what you've already seen before we took the break.
These are the ones you showed me earlier.
Thank you, sir. Having reviewed those, sir, does this appear to be an accurate transcription of the sequence and the content of the group text chat within that time frame?
Yes.
I would offer that, Your Honor.
All right. The only concern I have is I don't want to give the jury something they need a flashlight to read.
Well, my next.
So can I see it?
Of course.
Why don't I see? Thank you.
The first page is your distance vision.
I don't know why it's on blue. Can I have them in front of me
Can
while
I have
you're
that? Thank
displaying
you.
them?
Yes.
Please. Thank you very much.
And feel free to use the flashlight then.
Yes, thank you. Oh, yeah, that's much better.
Much better. Okay,
Yes.
now we can all see it. With regard to your initial text exchange that we talked about, can you confirm what you texted at 1:34 and 27 seconds in the afternoon of February 1st, 2022?
Yes. Do you want me, oh, troopers back out front, but in front of Agent House. Looks like more has been dug up there for at least, looks like it. That would be Brian Albert.
Brian Albert Senior.
Yeah, yep, see,
And his response was,
right now.
and that was at 1:34 PM and 45 seconds?
Yes, it was.
And you took that to be a question, correct?
Yeah, asking right now, yes.
And you responded to Brian by saying what to his question about right now?
I responded, yes,
And that was at 1:34 PM and 56 seconds?
yes.
You would have still been on scene at that time?
I'm not sure if I was still on scene, but I was obviously, if it was in the area, I must have been in the area, correct?
And then who responded to you?
Brian Albert again,
And his response was?
okay.
You you have a memory as to whether or not Brian Albert was on scene at that time or if he was somewhere else?
I don't have a memory of where Brian was at that time. I'd assume he's not, I'd assume he's somewhere else, yeah.
Your response to him, or your response to the group, I should say, was what?
I had to pick up a car, so I drove through.
Right, so this is a little further than we talked about. So take this one down, please.
Now we're at 1:35 PM and 16 seconds, Mr. McCabe.
Yes, that's correct.
And your text to the group of you, your wife, Brian and Nicole Albert is what?
Trying to get pictures.
All right. And at this point, I've asked the next bubble be displayed, and then I'm going to skip to the bubble after that once you see it. The next bubble comes from Brian Albert.
Yes, Brian Albert.
Yannetti, let him, the screen speaks for itself. If
What-
it doesn't, then the witness.
What time is that at?
1:35:32.
All right. And his response, does that appear to be a typo?
PK, I'm assuming.
And that is from whom?
Brian Albert.
All right. And the time there, are you able to make that out?
Let's say 1:35:34 or 1:38:34.
Whatever it says. If you can't see it, you can see it. Next.
Sure. And his response was,
Okay,
does that appear to be correct in the PK?
I'd have to go back and,
Well, the previous one you tested?
Next question.
Sure. All right, we can take that off for a minute. I'd like to just go over two more areas of these group chats with you. You would agree with me that later that same day on February 4th, the four of you, your wife, Brian Albert, Nicole Albert, discussed in that group chat the fact that Michael Proctor was talking to Kerry Roberts over the phone, correct?
Objection, Your Honor.
At 3:01 and 48 seconds, you commented on the interview of Michael Proctor with Kerry Roberts, did you not?
Objection.
I'd like you to not leave the witness in the dark if there's something that he can have.
What I'm going to do now, sir, is to hand you 3 more pages and ask if you can identify those.
thank you.
Mr. McCabe, generally, do you recognize those,
Yeah.
sir? All right, so
I
go
just
ahead.
march it.
Go ahead, Mr. Yannetti.
The pages that I've handed to you and that you now have in your possession, those are from the same group chat that you identified earlier, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And it appears to have the same sequence and content of the group chat as well?
Yes,
Over the Commonwealth's objection, again, I'm not sending anything to the jury that they can't read. Substance of those, each individual one will be question by question.
Understood. So, Mr. Bates, with regard to page 2160, I'm looking for the second bubble.
Do you have an extra copy for me to follow along? No? Or Jim, was it, Mr. Yannetti, was this in the, what was marked for, you're using that? All right,
Thank you.
all right. And if it's a question by question objection, just may what be displayed? And I did not take it in. I said the content on a question by question, so it's each bubble.
All right, you saw that at 3:01 PM and 48 seconds on February 1st that you texted, quote, very weird that she's been barely interviewed. The whole dead comment was just told. I was supposed to have them talk last night and forgot to tell Proctor to call her. Do you recall that?
I recall it, correct.
All right, and those were your words, correct?
Yes, they are.
May that be displayed? Please?
No, it's in. We may display it later, but I'd like to move this testimony along. So that's in evidence.
And then in that discussion at 3:03 PM and 15 seconds, it was Brian Albert who texted, quote, hope they don't think she's making it up after the fact for some reason, end quote, correct?
Objection.
I'll allow that.
Can you read the timestamp again?
It's the
Yes,
second
it's on
page.
page 02161.
Oh, I found it.
Yeah,
Yes.
it's in the middle. I got that timestamp correct?
3:03:15.
Correct. And I read that accurately. Hope they don't think she's making it up after the fact.
Yes, that's correct.
And then less than a minute later at 3:05 and 32 seconds, you replied, yes, she was hardly interviewed, and I think just answered what was asked. Oh, I'm sorry, strike that whole question. I skipped his next response, which was at 3:05 and 2 seconds, where he said, but if they barely interviewed her, that's on them, correct?
That's from Brian. Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Now, with regard to that exchange, you would agree with me that you were talking about Kerry Roberts being interviewed by Michael Proctor, correct?
I don't want to make an assumption. Do you have the text previous to this that shows that we're referencing Kerry?
I do, and I'll show you that only to refresh your memory.
Yeah, I don't want to assume something.
I understand. I'm going to show you one page and ask you to look at it silently to yourself.
Okay.
And I've opened the page.
Okay.
You can just look up at me when you're done.
Yeah, again, my assumption it's Kerry based. Can I go back another page?
Feel free.
Okay, that's what I was looking for.
Yes.
Did those previous pages refresh your memory about the context of your group chat conversation?
Yes, it did.
And certainly it was talking about Kerry Roberts being interviewed, correct?
Yes, it was.
You were passing along information about that interview to Brian Albert, were you not?
Yes, I was letting him know that Kerry was being interviewed.
And you were telling him things that she was saying, correct? Remember you said the whole dead comment was just told?
Objection, Your Honor.
Yeah, but
Sustained.
All right, in any case, we're going to move on to the very last session that I'd like to ask you about. Earlier that day, February 1st of 2022, at 12:50 p.m. and 37 seconds, Brian Albert texted the group, which would have again been his wife Nicole, your wife Jennifer, and you. And that text was?
Objection, Your Honor.
Okay, so I can't, which bubble on which page?
02148.
Right, on which page?
That's the page, 02148.
I don't have it. I don't know what the objections pertaining to. Jurors, I apologize that this is taking so long. You know what, Mr. Yannetti, why don't you? So you're objecting to it, so I'm not going to let you say what it is. You can show it to the witness. Which one is this?
Second bubble on 02148, then the third bubble on 02148, and then the first bubble on 02149. That's all I'll be asking about.
Thank you.
All right, so I won't allow, based on the objection from the Commonwealth, the second bubble on 02148. I will allow the author of the third bubble on page 02148.
No. The second bubble on 02148,
Is not allowed into evidence.
I need to be heard on that then.
No, I'll hear you at sidebar. And Mr. Jackson, if you are planning on doing this with the next witness, I'd like you to let Mr. Lally know which ones of these you intend to use so that we can avoid all of this. And if you have a copy from me, that would be helpful for objections. Yannetti?
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. McCabe, when we broke, I was just about to ask you about the last exchange here. You will agree with me that on February 1st of 2022 at 12:51 and 49 seconds, you texted the group chat to say, ask Chris to ask some questions, correct?
Yep, I'm reading it right now. Yes, that's correct.
And who was the Chris you were referring to?
That would be Chris Albert.
Brian's brother, correct?
That is correct.
And then you texted your wife, Brian Albert, and Nicole Albert, quote, tell them the guy never went in the house, correct?
Yeah, that's part of the same text. Yes,
Mr. McCabe, who was the guy that you were referring to? Does he have a name?
that would be John O'Keefe.
When you told the group, tell them the guy never went in the house, that was you talking about how you should all get your stories straight, correct?
No,
You would agree with me that your stories are all straight in terms of the guy never went in the house, correct?
Objection.
Can you answer that?
John never went in the house. It's not a story, it's a fact.
Well, when you said, tell them the guy never went in the house, Brian Albert was on that exchange still, was he not? He was still part of the group text?
Yes, Brian is on the exchange.
And Brian Albert was the one to respond, wasn't he?
Let me switch pages here. 51.
He responded, did he not?
Yes, he did.
And then at that point, you knew Brian Albert was the oldest brother of the Albert family, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
The oldest sibling in that family, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And in his response to your instructions that his younger brother, Chris, should say that John O'Keefe never went in the house, or the guy never went in the house, you would agree with me that he responded with one word, correct?
Yes, he did.
And in response to you saying the guy never went in the house, Brian Albert's response was, exactly, correct?
Yes, that's his response.
We're done here.
All right. Commonwealth, any redirect?
Just briefly, Your Honor.
Now, Mr. McCabe, John O'Keefe never went in the house that night, is that correct?
That's correct.
And from this text communication, as far as Chris Albert was concerned, was Chris Albert ever at the house on that night?
No, he was not.
And this is something that you, obviously, death of John O'Keefe occurring, how it did, where it did, and why it did. That was something that you discussed.
Can you keep your voice up?
Yes, I'm sorry. This tragic occurrence, as far as what happened to John O'Keefe, his death, where, why, how, that was something that you discussed within your family, is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Why?
I didn't hear that
Why
one.
was it a discussion in your family?
You're talking about the immediately after? It was, no one knew what happened. John never came in the house, so we had no idea what happened to John.
And John was someone you were friends with, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Now, did you ever tell anybody what to say at any point in time to the state police, to any investigator whatsoever?
No,
Did anyone in your family or in your presence ever tell anyone that in front of you?
no,
Now, you asked some questions about when you were looking out and you saw the SUV, correct?
yes,
And your focus, as you indicated in your testimony, was on the SUV, correct?
yes, that's correct.
Now, during the time that you were looking out, did you ever see a pickup truck outside?
I knew the pickup truck was out there, but again, I didn't look at the pickup. I kind of saw it, but was focusing on the SUV.
And
I saw a vehicle out there. Let's say that.
my question is more so, as far as the tire marks that you were talking about in the road, was that before or after the pickup truck was in?
It was after.
Now, you were asking questions about directionality and things of that nature, as far as coming down Chapman or Cedar Crest, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And so if someone had driven by the house, missed the house, and then went on to Cedar Crest, turned around, presumably then they would be taking a left or a right from Cedar Crest onto Fairview, is that right?
Yes, if they passed the house, they would have come to Cedar Crest and turned around and come back onto Fairview.
And you were asking questions about whether or not you saw Mr. O'Keefe from your vantage point in the SUV, is that correct?
Yes, I was.
You didn't see him, correct?
I did not see him.
Could you see anyone inside from where you were?
I could not see anybody in the vehicle.
Did you see anything about the windows as far as their tint or anything like that?
I don't recall the tint. I couldn't see inside though.
As far as any statements that Ms. Nagel made on the way home, is it your testimony that Ms. Nagel didn't say those statements or that you didn't hear those statements?
I did not hear those statements.
Now, turning to February 1st, do you recall what you were doing on that day when you drove by Fairview?
I don't recall what I was doing. I don't recall exactly what I did that day.
And were you going specifically by Fairview or where were you?
Based off of reading these text messages, I was doing something, picking up a car or something, it says. I don't recall where. And I cut down Fairview.
Now, as far as your statement in those text messages where you said, looks like more has been dug up, you recall that?
I don't recall it. I read it in the text message.
Do you recall what that was in regard to? As far as what were they digging?
Oh, sorry. I do recall. They dug out the snow. It looked like the snow banks. It looked like there was more snow dug out in the around the around the scene.
And by the scene, you mean around where the flagpole fire hydrant that was?
Correct. Yes.
Did you recall any sort of change in the weather between the 29th and February 1st?
I believe the temperature rose. Snow was starting to melt, if I recall.
Now, when you and your wife your wife was talking to Mr. O'Keefe and you were given directions, there was some reference to Bella's house, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And that was sort of used as a directionality as far as Mr. O'Keefe would be familiar with where Bella's house was.
Yes, that's correct.
What, if any, relationship in the past were you aware of between Mr. O'Keefe and Bella and Bella's mother?
At some point, Bella's parents were separated, since divorced. At some point, Mr. O'Keefe had a relationship with Bella's mother.
And after that conversation in which that was referenced as far as Bella's house, did you ever hear from John O'Keefe again?
Never heard from him again.
Anything?
Just very briefly.
Okay.
You were just asked if you ever told anyone, if you told anyone what to tell the state police or investigators, and your answer was no, correct?
Yeah, I don't recall telling anyone to tell anybody anything.
So with regard to your statement, tell them the guy never went in the house, who's the them?
Do you mind if I go back and read? I think I know, I just want to read it. The them was Channel 4 went into D&E. Yeah, you just asked me who them was.
And the answer is, you were instructing people on the group chat to tell Channel 4 that the guy never went in the house, correct?
Yes, this was on February
February 1st.
1st. As I said, none of us in the house had any idea what happened to John O'Keefe. So we instructed, I was saying, we don't know what happened. He never came in the house.
All right, so,
That's what was my statement was.
sir, I didn't ask you for any of that just now, did I?
You just asked me
No.
why I said
I
that.
asked you who the them was.
Objection,
Did I
Your
not?
Honor.
You didn't. You look like you asked me to elaborate.
Okay. So your answer to my question is, the them was you were saying that Channel 4 should be told that the guy never went in the house. Yes or no?
Channel 4 was who I was referencing. Yes.
All right, you are all set, Mr. McCabe. I will take those documents. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, ma'am.
Good afternoon.
Please state your name and spell your last name.
Jennifer McCabe, MCCABE.
And where do you live, ma'am?
Approximately 20. I lived in Canton, except when I first got married, I lived in Stoughton for a year or two.
And where you live currently in Canton, how long have you lived there?
I live at 12 Country Lane, and I've lived there about 10 years.
And prior to that, where did you live in Canton before Countryland?
15 Sutcliffe Ave in Canton.
And how long did you live on Sutcliffe?
Approximately 10 years.
And with regard to both addresses, who, if anyone, do you live there with?
I live there with my husband, Matt, and my 4 daughters.
And how old are your 4 daughters?
15, 16, 18, and 20.
Now, if I could turn your attention to January 28th and to January 29th, 2022. Do you recall what days?
I do, yes.
And do you recall what days of the week they were?
Friday and a Saturday.
So starting with Friday, January 28th in the evening, do you recall on that night or where you went?
Well, first I set up at my house for a team's hockey team. Then I met up with some parents for the Canton High basketball team. So we met up with some parents before. We had a drink, appetizers. My younger 2 were with us. We fed them dinner. And then we went on to Canton High School to the basketball game.
Now, starting back, the oldest daughter with the hockey dinner at your house, that was your daughter Allie, is that correct?
Yes,
She's your oldest?
yes,
Now, the daughter who had the basketball game, is that your second oldest?
yes,
And with regard to her, she was on varsity team, is that right?
yes,
For Canton High School?
yes.
And with respect to just basketball in general, when the kids were younger, what, if any, role did you have in regard to that? Objection.
I'll allow it, but then you'll move on quickly.
I was a basketball coach, rec, well, the town program.
For how many years?
I believe with Emily, I started when she was in 5th grade, and then I was also a coach for my daughter Olivia, I think starting when she was in 6th grade. And with my youngest, I think I coached from 1st grade on, up until 8th grade.
Now, as far as the game was concerned, is there sort of a typical start time for high school basketball game?
Yeah, move on. We know the time. Move on.
After the basketball game, where did you go?
My husband and I dropped my youngest daughter home, and then the waterfall. My sister, Nicole,
How many sisters do you?
3.
And do you recall about what time it was that you got to the waterfall?
Approximately 9 o'clock.
And when you say we, who do you mean?
My husband, Matt, and myself.
And do you recall which vehicle that you were in going around Canton?
I believe it was my car, yes.
And what kind of car was that?
Denali, Yukon, I think. Denali, yeah.
So bigger type vehicle?
Yes, big SUV.
Now, with respect to you got a cell phone around that time, is that correct? Your cell phone, what if any connection did that have between cell phone and vehicle?
At that point, don't think mine was connected. I'm not sure.
Now, when you arrived at the waterfall, did you go right in, or what if anything did you?
I waited a few minutes because my husband was on a phone call.
And at some point, did you and your husband then go in?
Yes.
And when you arrived in the waterfall, where within the waterfall?
We walked in, and I believe we sat at the 3rd table.
The time that you arrived, who, if anyone, was there that you were familiar with?
Chris and Julie Albert, Nicole Albert, Caitlin Albert, Tristan Moritz.
And at some point shortly after that, or at some point after that, who, if anyone, out of the group that you were with?
Nick Kolakidis did, and a little bit after. And then Brian Albert and Brian Higgins arrived. And then Karen and John arrived.
And prior to Karen and anyone from the group had left?
I believe Tristan left, maybe to go sleep because he had to plow, I think.
Now, with reference to Karen and John, talking about John O'Keefe and Karen, correct?
Yes.
And how long had you known John O'Keefe?
Approximately.
How was it that you first came?
John's sister in her hood and my daughter became friends with John's niece when they were in kindergarten. And during that kindergarten, John's sister and then brother-in-law passed away, and John moved in and took care of the kids.
Just for clarity purposes, this would have been when you were living at the home on Sutcliffe?
Yes.
And then after John moved out with his niece and nephew, what, if any relationship did you have with either John or his niece specifically?
So my daughter was very nice. And so, she would be over all the time, and JJ would come over with Patrick and pick her up.
And how would you describe your relationship with John O'Keefe?
He was my friend. I love John. He was an amazing guy.
Now, with reference to Karen Reed, and just for clarity purposes, do you see Karen Reed in the courtroom today?
Yes, I do.
You identify just as
He's seated between her attorneys.
you don't just ask the record reflect identification.
Yes.
By the witness. Now, with respect to the
John had reached out to me saying that he was dating a new girl and that she had MS, and I also have MS. So he said he would like for me to meet her.
how long have you had it?
5 years this October.
And do you recall specifically when around that was, what year, what month, anything like that?
That I met Miss Reed?
Yes.
Yes, they came over in July of 2020.
And came over to your house, is that correct?
Yes, they came over to kids, swam. I have a pool.
Now, over the course of, you were familiar, obviously, that Ms. Reed was dating Mr. O'Keefe, correct?
Mhm.
Over the course of time.
Yes. Sorry.
Over the course of time from July of 2020, when you met her, to January of 20, how often would you see Ms. Reed?
It would vary. There were times that we would bump into sports or, for my daughter's birthday party, when it was time to pick up, they'd come over and hang out, or it just varied. We have 4 kids, so we're always kind of in all different directions. Sometimes it depends on what sport month it is and what team we're with.
And how would you describe your relationship with Ms. Reed?
I enjoyed Miss Reed. I really liked her. I thought we connected from the beginning. She was very easy to talk to. She had MS, I had MS, and there's not a lot of people our age that I personally know that like what I was going through. So we had that in common.
Now, with respect, to either, starting with Mr. O'Keefe, was your friendship the type where you would have any sort of discussions about the girls that he dated at any point in time that you were friends with? Tell you about his relationship with Miss Reed specifically.
Objection.
I'm going to allow that. I'd like to see counsel at sidebar for just a minute, please.
Relationship with Mr. O'Keefe.
Yes, similar.
Now, on that evening, if I get to the water, you arrive about 9. About what time was it that you left?
Approximately midnight, a little give or take.
And so during the 3 hours or so that you were there, the mood or the me time you were
Fine, friendly, normal, typical night, you know.
there. And you mentioned that Mr. O'Keefe and Miss Reed came into the bar.
Correct.
And when they came into the bar, where did they go in relation to where you were?
They came right over and talked to the group that we were with.
And when Mr. O'Keefe and the defendant came over, what, if anything, did you observe or have with you?
Oh, she had brought a glass with her and kind of took it out of her coat and just kind of chuckled about it.
About the glass?
I believe it had ridges on it.
What, if anything, or what was in the glass?
It was clear.
Was there any other kind of like a straw or a lime or anything like that?
Yes.
Where were
See
any location to the waterfall?
just right up the street.
Now, over the evening, you were at a bar. Fair to say you were drinking. Is that?
Yes.
Do you recall specifically what you were drinking?
I think beer.
And same question with regard to Mr. O'Keefe. Do you recall him drinking and everything?
I can't be certain.
And with respect to Ms. Reed, same question as far as you recall her drinking, and if so, what, if anything, do you recall her?
Again, I remember glass with clear liquid in it.
Any different glass beyond the one?
I don't remember, sorry.
Now, when you left the waterfall sometime around me,
Yes.
called this generally what?
Yes, his niece had just gotten into Bishop Fian, so he was very excited.
And with respect to Ms. Reed, did you speak to her at the bar?
Yes.
And do you recall what, if anything, the two of you spoke about?
Yes.
What was it?
Karen had shared a little bit of frustration that morning, or one morning she had taken Kaylee to Dunkin' Donuts, and John, was frustrated, didn't, saying, don't take her. She's going to, make a habit of it, meaning like she's going to come to expect it every day. And then we just talked about how, challenging it is with kids. And, she mentioned that that's kind of all they have a fight about. And I said, yeah, well, welcome to parenthood, and, she just is a little bit frustrated, felt like the family needed to be doing more to help. And she just wished she had, more time, just her and John. But again, it was just, girlfriend to girlfriend kind of venting.
As far as Mr. O'Keefe was concerned, what, if any, observations did you make as to how he was dressed?
Baseball hat, jeans. That's what I remember.
Do you recall any sort of winter coat or heavier coat or anything like that?
No.
Over the course of the evening at the waterfall, what, if any, discussion was there amongst the group as far as going somewhere next or what to do after the waterfall?
Karen had asked Chris if we could go up to D&E. She wanted to go up to D&E and have him cook some food.
And was that something that was brought up by the defendant once, more than once, or something?
Many times.
And what was sort of the response from the group in regard to going to D&E and making?
So Brian, Chris, and Matt do this annual weight loss challenge every year, and it was in the midst of that. So they were like, no, 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 we can't go up there. We're not going to eat. We'll do it another time.
Now, following that conversation, what, if any, other, let me ask you this, why did you go to the waterfall first?
So I went to meet my sister, Nicole. She was heading there because she was going to go have a drink with her. Her son was going to have some friends and then meet out. So I was going to meet them for a drink for my nephew's birthday. Yes.
Brian Albert Jr. ever show up at the waterfall that evening?
He did not, no.
Why not?
Brian suffers from anxiety, and during that time period, he was really struggling.
He decided to stay home.
He just decided to stay home, yes.
And so after the discussion about going over to D&E and then communication of not going over, what, if any, other discussion was had as to where people were going or what was happening after leaving the waterfall?
Brian Albert Sr. just made a general, hey, I'm going to go home, have a drink with Brian if anyone would like to come.
And was that something that was just to certain people, or was it expressed at the table, or how was that expressed?
It was expressed to everyone, like, hey, we're going to go back home, have a beer with Brian if anyone would like to come.
Now, after that was sort of put out to the table, what, if any, discussion did you have in regard to that with either Mr. O'Keefe, Ms. Reed, or both?
Both of them. I said, oh, you guys should come. Do you want to come?
And did they indicate that that was something that they wanted to do, or did they indicate that they were coming?
They both wanted to come, and they said they were coming, yes.
Now, when you left the waterfall, who, if anyone, left with you or left at the same time?
I believe I walked out with Karen. I know I walked out with Karen, and I believe Miss Kolakidis as well.
Prior to you leaving, your sister Nicole and her husband Brian, had they left prior to you leaving?
Yes.
And so you're walking out with the defendant and Miss Kolakidis, is that right?
Yes.
And when you were walking out with them, what, if anything, was the sort of conversation or the discussion as you were walking out the door?
Well, Matt and John were still inside. So at one point I said, oh, Karen, why don't you just come with me? Figuring, because, Matt can talk to anyone, and God knows how long he was going to stay in there. So I was just like, hey, do you want to drive with me and they can meet us? Yes.
Now, as far as the car that you had parked there before, where was that parked in relation to what?
I believe I had to kind of walk straight out.
In the parking lot?
In the parking lot, yes.
And after you had exited from the waterfall?
Yes, he did.
And
I believe briefly, Karen, him, and I all spoke, yes. Them coming back to Fairview.
And after sort of the two of you parted ways, did you observe where Mr. O'Keefe and the defendant went?
I just saw them they walked left, I walked straight.
And if one were to walk left in the direction they were walking, where would that bring them to?
Washington Street, the main street.
So you went over then to your car in the parking lot?
Yes.
And while you were in your car in the parking lot, well, let me ask you this first. When you walked out of the waterfall, what, if anything, was different about the weather from when you had walked?
It had started to snow.
And as far as the snow was concerned, what was that initial point when you walked out of the waterfall? Had it accumulating or anything like that?
Yes, I would say, it was starting to cover the car, so you'd have to put your windshield wipers on to clear it.
So you didn't have to get the scraper out or anything like that, just click on the windshield?
Clip on the windshield wipers. I probably was lazy and just rolled the windows down to get it off the windows.
And so you're in the car for some period of time waiting for your husband, correct?
Yes.
And about how long is it that you're waiting for your husband before you finish?
Actually, it wasn't long. I think I turned the car on and then I saw him walking and I pulled up.
And while you're waiting for your husband, or shortly after he gets to any communication did you receive of that?
I received a text from John saying where to.
And with respect to that, did you respond in kind via text, or how did you respond, if at all, to Mr. O'Keefe?
I was driving, so I called him.
And when you called him, if you know, was that something that was done through Bluetooth with regard to the car, or
Yes, it would have been because it was my phone and I was driving. So I would have got it over the car. Yes, I plugged it in when I got it. I always plug my phone in when I get in if I'm driving.
And with your husband in the car, it's fair to say that he could hear both sides of the conversation as far as you and.
Yes,
And so that initial call that you placed to Mr. O'Keefe, is that done while you're driving?
yes.
And what, if anything, are you telling him as far as that initial call?
He had asked for he said, where to? I gave him the address. And then I believe I, just started giving him directions. And I actually think Matt spoke over me and saying, go this way, go this way. And then I said, yeah, you just go down to Fairview. It's at the bottom.
And so as far as the directions, do you recall anything specifically about what you told Mr. O'Keefe as far as where the directions were?
Well, he actually called back a second time. And when he called back a second time, I instructed him that it was by a friend's house, one of his niece and my daughter's friend. And I said, oh, it's right, go past Bella's street. It's at the bottom of the hill.
And before we get to that, just as far as that initial phone call, actually Fairview Road, you're familiar with,
Yes,
and it's where your sister lives with her family, correct?
yes.
And if I could just ask, with regards to your sister's husband, Ron, how long have you known him?
Since I was in kindergarten, very long time.
So they had dated for some period of time before they got married, and they've been married for some significant period.
Yeah, she had a crush on him for years. Then they dated, I think, for 10 years and before they got married. So yeah, they've been together most of my life.
Familiar with Fairview in the sense that there's on one end of it is Chapman and one end of it is Cedar, correct?
Correct.
And just in that initial phone call that you had with Mr. O'Keefe and you and your husband are giving directions, you recall if you were indicating to him to press or go to Chapman in order to get on the Fairview?
Go to Chapman.
And is that the way that you went as far as going from Washington Street downtown to Fairview?
Yes.
Now, how long a drive is that going from the waterfall to Fairview?
Approximately 5+ minutes, depending on if you hit lights.
Now, if you're indicating you're indicating to someone to come down Chapman, and you said it was, I'm sorry, your testimony is it's sort of towards the end from that direction?
The end of Fairview, the bottom of Fairview.
And that's to my point as far as the bottom. What if any kind of incline or decline, or how does the road sort of situated as you come from the Chapman side down to where your sister lives, 34 Fairview?
It's a hill.
And the hill goes down, is that correct?
Yes.
Is that somewhat of a precipitous? How would you describe sort of the hill?
Well, the first hill is a bit steep, and then it flattens a little, and then there's another hill. But the second hill is more long.
So there's actually two hills as you're going down, correct?
Yes.
Now, you mentioned the second call, Mr. O'Keefe then calls you.
Yes.
And about how much time elapsed between when you first talked to Mr. O'Keefe and the second?
Approximately 4 or 5 minutes tops.
During either call that you had with Mr. O'Keefe, could you hear anything? You had it on Bluetooth, right?
Yes.
Could you tell whether or not he was connected to a Bluetooth? Could you hear anything in the background?
I couldn't know.
And as far as when you were speaking to Mr. O'Keefe, did he express an intent that he was going to the house at Fairview?
Yes, he was driving there and he was trying to find it.
And when he indicated that he was trying to find it, was he expressing that in singular or plural or something else?
No, more general, like where is it type.
Did he make any reference during the time that you were talking to him to anyone he was with?
No.
And now, as far as the second call, you indicated, what did you use exactly as sort of a geographic locator?
My daughter and his niece's very close friend lives on a side street off of Fairview. So I just said, go past Bella's Street, and it's at the bottom.
And Bella is someone that's through his niece, John O'Keefe would have known, correct?
Correct.
Now, at this time, what, if any, relationship were you aware of between Bella's mother and John O'Keefe?
They had dated
I'm going to allow it.
They had dated briefly years before.
Now, was that sort of the substance of the conversation that you had with Mr. O'Keefe in that second phone call?
Yes.
Now, after that second phone call, did you speak to Mr. O'Keefe on the phone at any point in time after that?
No.
Now, you arrived at the house on Fairview. Do you recall where you parked when you got there?
Yes, pulled into the driveway.
And the driveway, the house at Fairview essentially has two garage doors. Is that correct?
Yes,
Sort of widens out as you get to the top closer to the house.
yes.
Do you recall where in relation to the driveway was parked when you got there?
I just remember pulling in, there was definitely a car in front of me. There possibly could have been a car to the left.
You exit the vehicle, go into the house, correct?
Correct.
When you get to the house, who, if anyone, do you observe?
When I walk in, Caitlin Albert, Brian Albert, Julie Nagel, and Sarah Levinson are all sitting at the kitchen table. My sister Nicole was in the kitchen wiping the counters because she's always cleaning. And Brian Albert and Brian Higgins were in the, I guess you'd call it the TV room area, just standing and talking.
Ma'am, I'm sorry, I'm just having a little trouble hearing you. So
Oh, okay.
that microphone, you can adjust that any way you want. So anywhere you want to put that.
Okay.
And so when you come into the house, where were you mentioned a table? Where were people situated?
In the kitchen.
With respect to what was going on at the house throughout the course of the evening.
I sat at the table and I just spoke to Brian and Katie and the two girls most of the night.
And just so we're clear, when you're talking about Brian, that's Brian Albert Jr. or Little Brian?
Yeah, little Brian. Yeah, little Brian.
Now, as far as at any point in time when you were at the house, you familiar with a gentleman named someone named Colin Albert?
I am, yes.
And how do you know?
He is my friend's son and my sister's nephew.
Your friend Julie's son, correct?
Yeah, so my friend Julie's son.
And your oldest daughter, Allie, was Colin's friend, so is Colin's friend with your oldest daughter, Allie?
Yes, they're born a week or two apart, and we've kind of just, they've done everything together. They're very good friends.
Now, at any point in time that you were there on that early morning, did you see Colin Albert at all?
No,
And when you arrived at the house, obviously you're familiar with your daughter and the car that she drives around that time. Did you see your daughter there, Allie, at any point in time?
no.
Were you aware at any point in time in that early morning hour that you were there that your daughter had been there at any point in time prior?
Sustained.
With reference to the home, at any point in time, did John O'Keefe ever come inside the house?
No.
During the time that you were there, let me ask more specifically, about how long a period of time was it that you were there, or about what time did you?
I believe I left approximately around 1:30, 1:45, approximately.
Did you know about what time it was that you arrived there?
I'd say approximately somewhere between 12:20, 12:30. Well, 12:20, I believe, 12:20-ish, because the last call from John, when I went back and looked, was 12:18.
Now, similar to what I asked about the waterfall, as far as the sort of mood, demeanor inside the house, what, if anything, do you recall?
Good. Everybody was in a good mood. There was no, Brian and Brian were talking. My sister was cleaning. I was talking with the kids, just a normal night.
Now, while you were in the kitchen dining room area for the time that you were there, did you see anybody or observe anybody from the group that you just described go anywhere else in the house as far as away from that area?
Julie Nagel went outside.
So beyond Julie Nagel going outside, did you see anybody else go upstairs, downstairs, to the basement area, or anywhere else in the house?
No.
Now, when you were in the car and you were driving, you hooked your phone up to the charger, is that right?
Yes.
Do you recall charging your phone at any point in time when you were at your sister's house on Fairview that night?
I don't recall.
And you mentioned Julie Nagel, Sarah Levinson. Were those people that you knew prior to that night of the 28th?
I was familiar with who Sarah Levinson was, maybe had run into her at different points. Julie Nagel was closer to Brian, so I would see her. I think she's dog sat for me when I've been away. Like, Brian will do it, but then if he's not available, Julie will do it. I don't know if she had dog sat for me before then or right after then, but I was definitely familiar with Julie, and she possibly could have dog sat for me prior to that.
And now, with reference, there was also someone there by the name of Brian Higgins, is that correct?
Correct.
And that is also someone who was there prior to you getting there, is that right?
Yes.
And what, if anything, did you know about Mr. Higgins, or did you know him prior to
I had met him a few times. He's Brian Albert's friend.
So other than being your brother-in-law's friend and meeting him a couple times, you didn't really know him that well, fair to say?
Good, yes.
Now, you mentioned at some points that Julie went outside, correct?
Yes.
Nagel went outside?
Yes.
And do you know what she was going outside for?
Yes, her brother had come to pick her up. And so she was going to go tell him, try to get him to come in.
And what, if any, conversation did you have with Ms. Nagel or Ms. Levinson in regard to their going home prior to Ms. Nagel going out and talking to her about it?
I'll sustain it in that form.
What, if anything, had you said to Ms. Nagel prior to her going out prior to her going outside?
Sustained.
Now, if you know, about how long was Ms. Nagel outside?
I believe it was just a few minutes.
And at any point in time while Ms. Nagel was outside, what, if anything, did you?
Excuse me?
So when Ms. Nagel went outside, what,
Mhm.
what were you?
I was sitting at the table and then my nephew had said another car was out there.
And after your nephew said that, what, if anything, did you do?
I went to the front door.
And front door of the home leads sort of, you walk in there, there's a foyer and a staircase in front of you.
Yes.
And as far as the front door was concerned, is there any sort of other door that's, is it just sort of the wooden front door, or is there another door in front?
The door was open, so it was just a storm door.
And the storm door is made out of glass, is that correct?
Yes.
So when you went over to the storm door and looked out, what, if anything, was?
I saw a vehicle.
And can you describe the vehicle that you saw?
I saw a dark SUV.
And as far as Ms. Nagel, did you make any observations of where she was when you looked outside?
I kind of just looked at the vehicle and then I saw lights kind of over to this side. But then once I saw the vehicle, I took out my phone and I texted John.
And just so we're clear, as far as when you say this side, so you're standing at the storm door,
Mhm.
see the vehicle, and where's the vehicle in relation to you and where you're standing at the front?
It was straight ahead.
Now, the headlights that you were saying is sort of off to the side. From your perspective, looking out at the street, is that to the left, to the right, or something else?
Left.
And as far as this dark SUV that you saw, did you tell anything else about it as far as the make, the model, or recognize it at all?
No.
Now, at this time on January 29th, 2022, were you familiar with any sort of vehicles that Mr. O'Keefe had?
Yes.
And what kind of vehicles did he have?
Gosh, I don't know the brand. It's, it was a small SUV type.
Do you recall, like, what color it was?
His might have been grayish. I'm not 100% sure.
And any other vehicles that he may have had?
Yes, he had this old fashioned car that he loved, but Kaylee is so embarrassed of it. But yeah, he had that as well.
Now, as far as Miss Reed was concerned, were you familiar with what kind of vehicle she had at that time?
Yes.
And what kind of vehicle were you generally aware of her driving?
She had a Lexus.
Was that a sedan or an SUV, or what kind of vehicle?
I think it was like a small SUV.
Now, the vehicle that you saw outside of the residence of Fairview when you looked out the storm door, was that consistent with what you knew Miss Reed to be driving at that time?
Yes.
Now, as far as that vehicle was concerned, at any point in time over the course of the evening, did you see anyone exit that vehicle or come out of that vehicle at all?
No.
Certainly never saw anybody exit that vehicle and walk over and come inside the house.
And
As far as that vehicle, when you first saw it, could you tell whether or not it was running or anything like that?
It was running. Yes, I could. I could tell it was running. It had the taillights. I could see the red.
You could
I'm
see
going
the
to
red.
actually keep your voice up, okay?
Okay, sorry.
Now, in addition to the taillights that you saw, could you see the headlights or anything like that?
Yes, the headlights were on.
And as far as the interior of the vehicle, were there any lights on inside the vehicle that you saw at any point in time?
No.
And as far as the windows of the vehicle, what, if anything, did you observe as far as their coloration? Was it tint or anything like that you saw?
Didn't observe. No.
Now, you see the vehicle sort of straight ahead of the front door, and then you pull out your phone to text Mr. O'Keefe, correct?
Correct.
Do you recall what you texted to him at that point?
I think I said here, question mark.
Do you think you said here? Is that correct?
Yes.
Sarah, may I approach?
Yes. Show Mr. Jackson, okay.
May I approach the witness, John?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm showing you a three-page document, just ask you to look at that.
Okay.
Just generally speaking, that three-page document, do you recognize the contents of that?
I do.
Or what do you recognize it to be?
It's my text messaging with John.
So from sort of the early part of the 28th and around midnight through, I'm sorry, the 29th through the entirety of the 29th.
Yes.
May I approach you, Your Honor?
Yes.
Almost.
Is there any objection, Mr. Jackson? Okay. Actually, great timing. So we'll have you back here at 2 o'clock. And Ms. McCabe, I'll just ask you to let the jurors.
Goodbye.
Okay, so we're still in session? That's what I was hoping for. Thank you. Yes. All right, thank you. And then, Mr. Lally, you'll be able to make those redactions that are necessary over the luncheon break?
Yes, Your Honor, I think, well, we can, and by we, I mean Ms. Gilman, because she's the one who can actually do these things. But no, I think we would be able to sort of take the whole numbers off of it and be able to print new copies without the numbers so that they can be
So
used.
the same version?
Exact same thing,
Therefore,
just with,
authentication, redacted for purposes of admission and publication.
yes,
All
yes.
right, great. I appreciate that. We'll see you at 2 o'clock.
Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, court back in session. Please be seated.
Right, so Mr. Lally, just before you begin, folks, I neglected to tell you before or during the testimony of Mr. McCabe, and I don't want to keep repeating instructions, but I do want to remind you, when it comes to electronic communications, before you can consider them in your deliberations, you must first find that it's more likely true than not that the person who authored or sent the communication was in fact the person identified as doing so. If you do not find it more likely true than not that the person identified as sending the message was the one who sent it, then you may not consider that electronic communication in your deliberations. All right, thank you. Mr. Lally, go ahead. Yes.
Those pages that I've just placed before you, do you recognize the contents of those?
I do.
And what do you recognize those?
They are text messages between myself and John.
And from sort of specifically that time period of the early morning of January 29th to the morning of January 29th?
Yes.
And what's contained in those, is that a fair and accurate portrayal of the content of those text communications?
Yes.
Now, with reference to Mr. O'Keefe, this is someone that you knew and you had his information put into your phone as far as contact.
Yes.
And on prior occasions when you had contacted, or specifically that morning when you had left the waterfall and you talked to him on the phone, you called him and who answered? You called the contact that you had as John O'Keefe, correct?
Yes.
Okay, who answered the phone?
John.
Okay. And then the contacts that you had put in as John O'Keefe called you and you answered, and who was on the other line?
John.
Your Honor, may I approach?
Yes.
I'll want to seek to introduce in a minute.
No objection, Your Honor.
Thank you. This is subject to what we talked about in sidebar?
Yes, understood.
Thank you. That's exhibit 89. All right, thank you.
Your Honor, with respect to what's now been marked as exhibit 89, if I could, with the court's permission, publish that to the jury.
Yes.
Okay, what's up on the screen, is that what you have before you as that exhibit?
Yes.
And this is a text communication between yourself and Mr. O'Keefe, correct?
Correct.
I'm sorry to do this. May we?
Sure, why don't you take that down, Ms. Gilman?
Thank you, Ms. Gilman. So, Ms. McCabe, with what's for you and what's up on the screen is the exhibits. There are sort of green bubbles and blue bubbles, right?
Correct.
And can you tell the jury as far as who's communicating which direction, as far as the green bubbles are who and the blue bubbles?
Green is John and blue is myself.
And so the first text from this particular date, if you could just read to the jury as far as from whom the message is sent, what the content is, and then what the time.
So John sent to me where to at 12:14. Okay.
So the next bubble down is a blue bubble, is that correct?
Correct.
Similar to the one before, can you just read as far as that? Before I get to that, I'm sorry. So you receive that message from Mr. O'Keefe, you call him, have a conversation, he calls you back for the conversation.
Correct.
And then subsequent to that, could you read the next blue bubble down as far as from whom, what the content is, and what time it is?
So this one is from myself to John, and it says here at 12:27. So at that point, I see a car out front, and I text him here. Correct. I sent to John, pull behind me at 12:31.
And what were you referring to when you said pull behind?
So at this point, the car had moved from the prior spot where I originally saw it. So I thought, what is he doing? Why don't they just pull behind me in the driveway? Me to John saying hello, and it was at 12:40.
At this point in time, as far as when you're sending these text messages over these periodic, what, if anything, are you doing sort of in?
So I originally went to the front door, saw the car, texted them, then texted John. Then I went back, kind of sat at the table, just either threw my phone probably in my back pocket. And then a couple minutes later, I got up again and saw that the car had moved. So I had sent the pull behind me. And then a few minutes later, I went back to the front door, I'm sorry. So at this specific point at 12:40, when I say hello, I cannot be certain whether they were still out front or if they had left.
And from any of these text messages that you sent, what, if any, response did you receive from Mr. O'Keefe after the where?
None. Sure. Jen to John, where are you? And that was at 12:42. Myself to John, hello, at 12:45.
Now, this is later in the morning, and we'll get to that a little bit more in a moment, but at some point you left the residence of Fairview, you went home, and you were woken by something, and then at some point you texted John later on that morning, the 29th.
Yes.
You know, the next couple of those text messages that you sent at that point.
Correct. Myself to John, please answer at 4:59. Myself to John, Karen is worried. We need to find you at 4:59. Myself to John, please answer so I know you're okay. 5:04.
May I approach this retreat? Now, Ms. McCabe, if I can take you back to at the house on Fairview. Again, you're sending these text messages and going back to the table and then going back to the window at various times
To the front door.
to the front.
Yes.
And at any point in time, do you see anybody exit from the dark SUV or the black SUV you see in front of the house?
No.
And at any point in time, did John O'Keefe come into that?
No.
And at any point in time, did John O'Keefe respond to your text messages?
No.
And at any point in time, did John O'Keefe call?
No.
Now, at some point subsequent to this, have you had occasion to look at your phone or at your call history?
Yes.
And through review of that, were you able to see phone calls that your phone made to John O'Keefe's phone around that same time frame that you were texting him and going to school?
Yes.
May I approach Ron?
Yes.
And I'm showing you a 4-page document. Actually, look at that and look up when you finish. And if I could suggest, I think it starts in reverse order from page 4, timing-wise, up through page 1. Just generally speaking, ma'am, do you recognize what's contained in that 4-page document?
I do.
And what do you recognize?
The calls between myself and John O'Keefe.
And am I correct that it starts in sort of a ending order as far as the earliest calls are on page 4 and then the most recent are on the first page?
Yes.
And the phone calls that you were testifying to about before, as far as talking to him on the way from the waterfall to residence at Fairview, did they appear in those?
They do.
Okay.
So, Ms. McCabe, as far as the first calls that you were testifying about, as far as when you spoke to Mr. O'Keefe on the way from the waterfall to the residence at Fairview, were those contained within those calls?
Yes.
As far as, is there a time that's associated with those calls that you observe in those 4-page documents?
Yes.
And what are they?
12:14 and 12:18.
And turning your attention to page 1, that would be sort of the last in line there. What time is the last call between yourself and Mr. O'Keefe, and who's calling?
I'm calling him at 5:25.
May I approach him?
Yes.
Almost 60 introduce him as the next exhibit.
Is there any objection?
There's not, Your Honor. Thank you.
Now, Ms. McCabe, you had mentioned that during the course of the evening, shortly after you arrived at the residence of Fairview, you observed a vehicle outside of your sister's house, correct?
Yes,
And Your Honor, with court's permission, I would ask to publish with this witness exhibits 71, 72, and 73.
Okay.
And Ms. McCabe, first and foremost, what's up on the screen is exhibit 71. Do you recognize that?
I do.
Okay, I think you can just go right to what you wanted to identify, please, Mr. Lally.
So, Ms. McCabe, in front of you on the desk, there should be a laser pointer. Just click on the button and point at the screen. And if I could ask if you could direct, well, first, with respect to this photograph, do you observe in this photograph where you first saw the black SUV in front of the house?
It was directly if I was staring out the front door. So this angle's kind of unique to see it. But if you go from the front door directly straight out, so maybe the edge, you understand what I'm saying? So if there's the front door and I look straight out, but the perception is almost like a side view. It's not straight on, so it could have been a little over here.
So Ellie, why don't you show another picture if this one isn't helpful?
Yes, so just follow this and then come straight.
And lastly, now, Mr. McCabe testified that at another point you come to the front door and you observe the vehicle in a different spot, correct?
Correct.
If you could, again, using the laser pointer, just bring your attention to where in this photograph, if at all, you observe with the vehicle in a second.
It was right above, right near the flagpole.
Okay, just come in, you can take that. Now, turning your attention to back in the home, at some point you indicated you looked out and didn't see the black SUV there anymore.
Correct.
And what was your thought as far as where John was or where John had gone at that point?
At that point, I thought maybe they decided not to come in. Maybe they got into an argument, or maybe Kaylee had called.
Did you think much of it at that point?
No.
Now, you leave the home around what time?
Approximately 1:30, between roughly 1:30, 1:45.
And when you leave, who, if anyone, goes with you?
So it's myself, my husband, Matt, and I had offered, when Julie Nagel's brother had come to the house earlier, I had offered Julie and Sarah Levinson a ride home because we had just gotten there and they had wanted to stay later. So I also drove home Julie and Sarah. Well, my husband drove them home.
And so you exit the house, go out to the vehicle, correct?
Correct.
And your husband, Matt, was driving?
Yes.
Where are you seated?
And the front seat.
And do you recall where Ms. Levinson and Ms. Nagel were seated in the car?
They were in the back seat.
Do you recall which one was on which side?
I do not.
And when you come out of the house and you're starting to go home, what, if anything, had changed as far as the weather from when you had gone in to when you had?
The snow had, accumulated more.
And when you get into the vehicle and as the vehicle is pulling away, what, if any, conversation do you recall having with anyone in the car?
When I got in the car, I kind of turned around to Julie.
I'm going to allow that subject to another strike. There's a portion that's relative. Go ahead.
I turned around and was facing them and talking to them. And I believe Sarah Levinson had laughed or made a joke because I had bread or something in my car. And we made a joke about that. I had had my niece earlier that week for the week. And so I had brought stuff in the car because I was dragging her from one of my kids' sporting events to the next.
And as you recall which direction, or did you observe which direction your husband, Matt, exited from residence in Fairview? And by that, I mean, did he head towards Chapman or did he head towards
Chapman.
And so as far as, I may not have asked this before, but as far as the black SUV that you observed in front of the house, which direction was that vehicle facing?
Chapman.
Each of the times that you saw it?
Yes.
And so as with that vehicle, as with the one that your husband was driving, which side of the vehicle would have been closest to the house in Fairview?
Passenger.
Now, as you're driving past the house, heading, how were you positioned within the car?
I'm turned chatting to the girls.
So, and when you're turned, are you turned towards the window or are you turned towards the console? Which way are you?
Turn the console towards the back seat. So my back is to the window.
And either of these girls, did you know where they lived?
No,
Do you recall whether or not you found their homes by way of sort of yes, or was it just sort of verbal directions?
I'm assuming they just gave Matt directions to where they lived.
And so you drop each of them off. Do you recall which order they were dropped off in?
Julie, then Sarah.
And then following dropping off Sarah, where did you and your husband?
Home.
And this whole trip sort of from Fairview to dropping off Miss Nagel, Miss Levinson, and then going home, about how long a period of time is that?
It could be 20, 30 minutes, maybe about approximately 20 minutes. Not exactly sure. Yes,
And when you and your husband Matt got home, went inside the house, and where did you go?
I went upstairs to bed.
And at some point, did your husband come up as well?
He did.
Was it a long period of time between when you arrived home and when your husband came up?
I don't think too long. I think he had like some cheese or something because he was on a crazy diet, and then he came upstairs.
Now, did you go right to sleep, or what, if anything, did you do when you went up to bed?
I asked him to watch a show. He said no, he was going to fall asleep, which he does usually immediately. And I went on my phone.
And what, if anything, do you recall doing on your phone as far as going on?
I was researching. My husband and I did briefly talk. My daughter had gotten an offer to play on a club
Just tell us what you released.
Sure. I was researching a basketball team, and I believe I also texted my sisters, and I texted in a group chat with my husband and another individual.
Now, if I could just turn your attention back to when you were at the house on Fairview that evening, and I believe this is the last time, so I apologize for the back and forth, but when you were there, what, if any, videos or any music or anything that you pull up on your phone share with the group that you were?
So one of my sisters loves this song "Raining Men," and she always, well, not always, maybe every once in a while, she's a little too much to drink and takes out an umbrella and sings and dances, and it's like a big family joke. And my other nephew had previously been over and showed me the video from whenever, I don't know if it's the 1970s, of "It's Raining Men." So I just was playing it, showing my other nieces and nephews, and we were just like laughing because they all have umbrellas, and it's just something, it's like an inside family joke. So I played that, I think, a couple of times.
And so after you get home and you're looking at the basketball program and things of that nature, what, if anything, else did you do before you went to bed or went to sleep?
Nothing. I possibly could have gotten up to go to the bathroom. I do that almost every night.
Now, at this time, you had an iPhone, is that correct?
Yes,
Did you also have an Apple Watch?
I did. Yes.
And do you recall whether or not you were wearing the Apple Watch that evening or when you went to bed or anything like that?
I do not recall.
As far as the Apple Watch is concerned, is that something that you routinely or always take off before you go to bed? Or?
Mostly, but not always. I mean, there are times I go to bed with it on. More often than not, I take it off, but there are times that I do sleep with it.
And with respect to this particular evening, do you recall whether you had it on or whether you took it off or even had it on at all?
I don't recall if I had it on that night.
Now, coming back to that last exhibit, as far as the phone calls were concerned, were there certain phone calls that you made to Mr. O'Keefe's phone around the time that you were observing the vehicle outside?
Yes.
Do you recall making any phone calls to Mr. O'Keefe at that time?
I don't.
Fair to say that at no point while you saw the vehicle outside did you have any conversation with Mr. O'Keefe?
I didn't.
Now you go to sleep, and at some point later on in the morning, you wake up, correct?
Correct.
And what is it that wakes you up, and when about was
I woken up to my phone ringing.
And do you know what time it was?
4:53.
And according to your phone, who was calling you at 4:53?
John's niece.
And so that would be John's niece, Kaylee, is that correct?
Correct.
And how old was she at this time?
I believe she was 14.
And she had just gotten into the Chaffeen, correct?
Correct.
She was in 8th grade going in, finishing up her 8th grade year of middle school, correct?
Yes.
Is that a normal thing, that Kaylee would be calling you at 4:53 in the morning on a Saturday?
No.
So you answer the call, is that correct?
Yes.
When you answer the call, who, if anyone, is initially on the other?
Initially, it's Kaylee.
And what, if anything, did Kaylee say to you?
That John didn't come home and Karen wanted to talk to me.
And even in that initial call, when you're speaking to Kaylee, what, if anything, do you hear sort of in the background when you're talking?
Karen screaming.
And could you hear what she was screaming?
She was just screaming, Jen, Jen, Jen,
Fairly loudly, is that correct?
extremely.
Now, at some point, does the defendant get on the phone with you?
She does.
And what, if any, conversation do you have with her at that?
She proceeds to scream my name multiple times. And she tells me that John didn't come home. They got into a fight and that she left him at the waterfall.
And how do you respond?
I had just woken up. I was confused. I didn't know what she was talking about. I was like, what are you talking about? And then she, told me that they had gotten into a fight and she left him there. And now where is he? And she was just kept screaming my name over and over. And so then I remembered that Chris Albert had still been at the bar. So I thought, well, maybe John walked home with Chris because Chris lives close to the waterfall.
And so at some point, that conversation ended and you recall how that ended?
I told her that I was going to call Julie and see if John had ended up with Chris.
So you hang up with her, and then what did you do then?
I called Julie Albert.
And did Julie pick up the phone?
She did not.
And as you were calling Julie, did you have any conversation with your husband Matt around that time?
Yes. He, had kind of shot up out of bed when Karen had called. When Kaylee had called because Karen was screaming. And then he was, what's going on? And I said, well, I'm calling Julie because Karen, they got into a fight and I was trying to explain it to him. And he said, what are you talking about? We saw them outside of your sister's house. And at that point, I hung up.
And when you hung up, Julie had not answered yet, is that correct?
Correct.
Now, as far as Miss Reed is that someone who had your phone number? Did you have her plugged into your phone as a contact before that date of January 29th?
No.
Never had any kind of conversation with her over the phone as far as a text or a phone call or anything? You didn't even have her information?
Correct.
And so after hanging up while calling Julie, what, if anything, did you do then?
And then I'm not sure if I called Kaylee back or if Kaylee called me back. Yes, I get Karen. I get in touch with Karen again, and I say, Karen, we saw you outside of my sister's.
And what was her response?
She told me that she didn't remember going there. And then she started yelling, Jen, Jen. And then she was saying, did I hit him? Could I have hit him? And then she proceeded to say that she had a cracked taillight.
And this is while you're still in your home and you're in your bed, correct?
Correct.
And what was your response to that?
I thought she was honestly like just talking crazy. And then she said, oh my God, I left him there. Like she was extremely irrational. She said that it told me again that they had gotten into a fight. So now she was just kind of all over the place, just screaming. She was very hard to understand. So my brain started going, okay, well, if she left him there, where could he be? Who could he be with?
As you're going through that sort of process, what did you do next?
So then earlier in the night, there was another individual who we had been in contact with, or my husband had been talking to, and he had mentioned that he was going to meet up with John at Waterfall as well, but he never ended up coming. I knew he was at a house close to Fairview. So I thought, well, maybe if they got into a fight, like John might have texted this individual and maybe he just ended up on his couch.
Who was that individual?
Tom Beatty.
And who is Tom Beatty in relation to, how did you know?
He has two daughters that are the same age as my daughters.
That's one of those daughters, at least around the same age as Kaylee.
Yes.
And so based on sort of that process, thought process and what you're doing, what did you do next?
So then I start calling Tom.
And at any point in time, did you call Tom? Did Tom pick up the phone? Did you speak with him?
He did not.
And so following that, what did you do?
So I know at some point I was starting to call John. My husband was as well. At that point, I get up and I'm like, okay, well, got to go out and look for him. And in my head, I was thinking I'll drive over to Tom's and maybe he's there. I then go downstairs. Matt gets up. He's starting to get dressed. I go downstairs. I make a coffee. And I'm not sure how much time passed. Then all of a sudden, I hear screaming out front.
Now, if I could just take it back for a second, as
Mhm.
far as a decade or so that you had known and been friends with John O'Keefe, with his either his niece or his nephew or both home, is him not coming home? Is that something that had ever happened before? You were ever aware of before?
I was never,
John ever gone out at night and then not come home when the kids?
not to my knowledge, no.
So at some point you make your way downstairs. Is that right?
Correct.
And then what, if anything, did you hear once you were downstairs?
Screaming
And where was the screaming coming?
out front.
And when you heard that screaming, where did you go?
I ran to my front door. I opened my front door, correct.
And then,
Miss Reed came running up my walkway.
and prior to, during any of the other conversations that you had with Miss Reed, do you know where she was when you were talking to her?
No,
Obviously, the first call was Haley calling from the house. That was
Yes.
the assumption.
Mhm.
And then subsequent.
yes,
And as far as the second call that you were talking about, know where she was when she was talking to you then.
the first couple calls, I know she was at the house, and then I don't know.
So was opening your door, hearing you screaming from out front, was that something that surprised you?
Yes,
And when you hear the screaming, if you could just explain to the jury, how loud was the screaming that you were hearing?
very loud.
And what, if anything, was she saying?
It was more of the Jen, did I hit him? And then she would yell, did I hit him? Could I have hit him? And then she was yelling, we have to go to Fairview.
And in addition to Miss Reed, what, if anything, else did you see when you opened up the door?
Just,
Did you
yeah,
see a vehicle?
yes,
Where was the vehicle and what did the vehicle look
it was in my driveway. I believe the driver door was left open.
like? And what kind of vehicle was it?
A black Lexus.
Consistent with what you had seen outside of Fairview the night or earlier in the morning.
Yes,
And so as she's coming up your walk towards your front door,
running, yes.
and then what, if any, conversation did you have with her there in reference to that?
I just said, Karen, Karen, I was trying to calm her down. Matt came, I believe, and was yelling down that she was going to wake up the neighborhood. And then she was yelling that we had to go to Fairview. So I told Matt that was going to go with Karen.
Initially, before that, what were your plans as far as going to look for John before Miss Reed showed up again?
My husband and I were going to go to Tom Beatty's.
Now, once you decide that now you're going with Miss Reed, the defendant, where did the two of you go?
So as we walked out, there was a car pulled up and then a plow. No. So in the car was Kerry Roberts. And so she kind of rolled down the window and was like, Karen, what are you doing? And then the plow was behind her. So Kerry pulled up and I believe I told Karen that I was going to drive her car because I didn't want her driving because she was hysterical. So we got in her car and then Kerry Roberts called Karen. And then Karen was screaming and, saying that she had cracked her taillight. We need to go to Fairview. Could I have hit him? Did I hit him? And then she would just scream our names. Kerry was telling her to shut up, that we needed to just go back to John's and we'll drive in one car and let's go to John's. Maybe he's there and he's passed out and you didn't see him.
When you open up the door initially and you come outside and see the defendant out there screaming and all of that, again, with respect to the weather, what was the weather at that point?
It was like dark and it was almost like a whiteout.
And so you get into Ms. Reed's vehicle, correct?
Yes,
And you're driving that vehicle from your house to Meadows Ave, is that correct?
yes,
That's Mr. O'Keefe's house.
yes,
You're familiar with that residence, you've been there plenty of times before.
yes.
Now, with respect to Kerry Roberts, did you know Kerry Roberts prior to this morning of January 29th?
I had met her once before.
And can you describe for the jury sort of the circumstances of that or how you knew her prior to January 29th?
Way back when, after John's sister and brother-in-law died, I would have Kaylee a lot, and Carrie would have Patrick. And one day, John said, I get a discount at Reebok. I'm going to take you guys for sneakers, get all your kids' sizes. So he took Carrie and myself, and we went to Reebok. We bought sneakers for all my girls and me. And then he took Carrie and I to the hillside for lunch just to thank him for, helping, because that's what he did.
Now, was Kerry Roberts someone that you had as contact saved in your phone? Had you ever texted her, or called her, talked to her over your phone before?
No,
So you indicated that Mr. Roberts then calls Miss Reed's phone while you're in Miss Reed's car, correct?
yes,
Now, as far as that, Miss Reed's phone, was that similar to your phone the earlier in the morning? Was that hooked up in any way or matched or paired with the vehicle that you were driving?
yes,
So fair to say you could hear both sides of the conversation as far as Miss Reed talking next to you and then obviously Miss Roberts on the other end.
yes,
So the conversation that you were talking about as far as Miss Roberts saying, shut up and we're going to Meadows Ave and all that, you could hear Miss Roberts saying that?
yes,
Now, the vehicle, when you get into the defendant's vehicle, she pulled in straight into your driveway, is that correct?
yes,
So fair to say you had to back out of the driveway, correct?
correct.
Now, when you were operating Miss Reed's vehicle in reverse, what, if anything, showed up in sort of the center console area of that?
I do not remember. I don't know.
Do you recall anything as far as the camera or anything like that?
I don't remember. I don't remember.
Back the vehicle out of the driveway. And
Yes,
about how long a drive is it from your house to Mr. O'Keefe?
approximately 5-6 minutes.
And when you get to Mr. O'Keefe's house, where do you park?
I pull in the straight in the driveway.
And after you pull into the driveway, at some point you all get out, correct?
Yes,
Do you recall who pulled in first as far as who was in front of who on the way to Meadows, yourself or Miss Roberts?
I believe I was in front.
You would have pulled into the driveway and parked, and Miss Roberts would have pulled in and parked behind you, correct?
Yes,
And so after the three of you get out of your respective vehicles, what happened?
Karen brings us to the back of the car and says, look, see, I have a cracked taillight.
And where on the vehicle was she directing yourself and Miss Roberts' attention?
The back right.
The passenger side, rear part of the vehicle.
Yes.
And when you looked at that area of the vehicle, what could you see at that?
I saw that there were missing pieces, but there was also snow covering it. And Karen was screaming, look, look. And then Kerry was screaming back at her. It was very chaotic. So I didn't stare in depth, but what I can tell you is I saw missing pieces from the taillight.
And at some point, about how long a period of time is this that you're out in Mr. O'Keefe's driveway looking at the cracked taillight?
Not long, because then Carrie's, yelling at her, telling her she's crazy and that she was driving around drunk and she could have hit anything, and kind of rushes us to go into the house to look in there for John.
Your Honor, with the court's permission, I would ask if I could publish on the screen what's been marked as exhibit number 2.
I do.
What is that?
That is Meadows Ave, John's house.
Pulled in, that's not visible in the photograph, correct?
Correct.
Which side of the photograph would the driveway be? The left or
The right.
And Your Honor, may I approach?
Yes.
I'm just showing you another photograph. Just ask you to look at that, look how it's finished.
Okay.
Do you recognize what's in that photograph?
Yes,
What do you recognize?
that's John's car.
Where is John's car in relation to John's?
It's parked to the side of the driveway.
And you also see sort of the garage area in that photograph?
Yes.
Of course, permission if I could publish that to the jury now as well.
Okay.
Now, Mr. K, with reference to what's up on the screen, is that the photo that you just had for you?
Yes.
And there are 2 garage doors on the house at One Meadows Ave, correct?
Correct.
Left and a right, is that a fair way?
Yes.
And you've been inside Mr. O'Keefe's house a number of times, correct?
Yes.
Now, with respect to the garage door on the left, what was stayed within that part?
His old-fashioned car. Yes.
And on the right side of the garage, do you recognize what's in those photographs?
Yes.
And what do you recognize those to be?
The defendant's vehicle.
May I approach?
Yes.
You want to call him up to speak?
No objection, Your Honor. Thank you.
With the court's permission, if I could, Mr. McCabe, what's depicted in this photograph is the defendant, Ms. Reed's vehicle, correct?
Correct.
And in sort of focus here is the right rear passenger side of that vehicle.
Correct.
And the tail light, if you could, with the laser pointers, just direct the jury's attention to where you observe that. Now, Dan, with respect to what's depicted in this photograph as far as any damage that you observed to this tail light area on the rear passenger side, is that consistent with what you observed in the driveway at One of Meadows Ave when the defendant was showing?
Correct, minus the snow, etc.
Again, do you recognize what's depicted in this photograph?
Yes,
And this is essentially a closer image of that same rear passenger side tail light area, correct?
yes,
Again, what's depicted in this, is that consistent with what you observed minus sort of the caked in snow when you were in the driveway of Mr. O'Keefe's house on the morning of the 29th?
yes.
Gentlemen, you can take that down, and Your Honor, with the court's permission, I would ask to publish just a short portion of, actually, I'm sorry. If I could publish a portion of what's been marked as Exhibit 6, which is the ring camera from the driveway.
Okay.
Ms. Gilman, if I could have video number 154 from the driveway. Ms. McCabe, directing your attention up to the screen, what's been marked as Exhibit 6, or video from Exhibit 6. Do you recognize what's depicted in this video?
I do.
What do you recognize?
That's myself getting out of the car at Meadows Ave.
Is that essentially where you parked Ms. Reed's vehicle when you pulled in?
Yes,
If you could, just direct the jury's attention with the laser pointer as to where Ms. Reed's vehicle is that you parked, and if you see Ms. Roberts' vehicle.
that is Miss Reed's, and that would be Miss Roberts.
And as far as the right garage door that you entered into the house, if you could direct the jury's attention to whereabouts that would, I know it's not on the video, but where would it?
Walk straight.
If you could run this in its entirety. Ms. McCabe, what was depicted in that video, is that consistent with what you observed, the weather conditions to be around the time that you arrived at Mr. O'Keefe's house?
Yes,
And lastly, in this line, Your Honor, if I, with the court's permission, could publish just a very short portion of what's been marked as Exhibit 41. Gentlemen, if I could ask you to fast forward this to about 2 hours and 10 minutes. If you could play the next. Stop there. And again, what's in this video, do you recognize that, Mr. Jake?
yes, I do.
What do you recognize that?
That is John's house.
Ms. Gilman, if you could play the next. Now, what's depicted in this video, sort of the screen directly in front of you, do you recognize what that is?
Yes,
What do you recognize that?
John's driveway.
As far as what, if anything, do you observe in John's driveway?
John's car and Karen's car.
And where, if you could, using the laser pointer, just direct your attention to where is the defendant's car and where is Mr. O'Keefe's?
Mr. O'Keefe's car and the defendant's.
And where you observe the defendant's car to be, is that essentially where you parked it at that time?
Yes,
John, may I have a moment?
I'll see counsel at sidebar for just a minute. Jurors, I just want to tell, I appreciate council trying to work together for this. It's probably going to take too long, so we're just going to make do. We've had enough interruptions today. So.
Now, Mr. McCabe, as far as what you observe from what you can on the screen right now, the condition of the passenger side tail light, is that consistent with what you observed when you parked the vehicle there sometime earlier that night?
It's kind of hard to see from this distance.
Let's go into detective. Now, Ms. McCabe, you then yourself, the defendant, and Ms. Roberts then get into Ms. Roberts' vehicle, is that correct?
Yes.
Seated where within Ms. Roberts' vehicle as you're going from Meadows Ave, or what was the plan and where were you going sort of first when you left Meadows Ave?
We were going to Fairview
And why were you going to Fairview?
because Karen kept screaming, we need to go to Fairview.
Now, who was seated where within the vehicle when you did it?
Kerry was driving, I was in the passenger seat, and Karen was in the back.
And for the lighting conditions at this point that you're driving over there?
It was hard to see out the window. You really had to be kind of staring out. It was dark. The snow was coming out the car.
And as you're making that drive, or as Ms. Roberts is making that drive from Meadows Ave to Fairview, about how long a drive is it?
Approximately 10 minutes. I mean, with the weather, the lights, the street lights, I would say about 10 minutes, give or take.
And as far as during the drive from Meadows Ave to Fairview, what's going on inside the car over the course of that ride?
Karen is in between us, like from the back, kind of pushing up in between Kerry and myself. And she's just screaming, Kerry, Kerry, her name over and over, my name over and over, and repeating certain phrases. Could I have hit him? Did I hit him? Kerry is yelling at her to shut up, to sit back, to buckle up, to look for John.
And while this is going on, what, if anything, are you and Ms. Roberts doing in the front seat?
She's slowly driving and I'm just peering out the window looking for John. I mean, it was a crazy situation. She's screaming, he didn't come home. Could he be walking home? Where is he? So we're just looking out the window, looking for John.
Now, during the time that this is going on and Ms. Reed is sort of screaming in between you, was that continuous or what, if anything else, did you see her doing in the back seat while you were going from Meadows Ave there?
I didn't see her doing anything. She just continuously screamed that. And then as we got by different landmarks, she then started, screaming, asking if John could be at certain people's houses.
And whose houses was she asking
if she could be at Bella's house?
Referring to the directions that you had provided the night before?
Correct.
And so that would have been, Bella was a child who was around the age of Kaylee and your daughter, correct?
Yes.
And there have been some years in the past dating relationship between Mr. O'Keefe and Bella's mother, correct?
Yes.
And so Ms. Reed is saying that in the car that morning as you're driving over to Fairview?
Yes, she asked, could he have been with Ashley? And I looked at her and said no, because to me that was a crazy idea. And then Kerry had mentioned, do you think he could have called somebody else that lived on a street over? And she started screaming, who's that? Who's she?
And you recall who Kerry referred to?
Yes. A woman that John had previously dated.
And was that anywhere recent in time to when you're driving around on January 29th when they had dated?
No.
So similar to Bella's mother would have been years before.
Correct.
And so when Ms. Roberts said that, what, if anything, to the defendant?
She was just spiraling, yelling about Ashley, who was Bella's mom, and talking what I thought was very irrational about John maybe being with her.
So you're looking around outside of the vehicle as the vehicle is going down towards Fairview, is that correct?
Yes.
And you recall how it was that Ms. Roberts came about coming to Fairview, similar to the night before? Did she come in from the Chapman side or from the Cedar Crest side?
Chapman.
And as the vehicle turns from Chapman onto Fairview, what, if any, conversation was going on at that point?
Well, Bella lives on that street, so that was when that conversation was being had. Also, just a continuation. It was just like continuous screaming of our names, Kerry screaming at her to sit back. And then sometimes she would sit back and almost like be quiet for a minute, and then it would start all over again.
Now, as you were coming down Fairview Road, what, if anything, were you saying to Ms. Roberts did Ms. Roberts know where she was going as far as where your sister lived?
No, I told her that my sister lived at the bottom. And then as we got closer, I said, just past, see where those trees are? Just past the trees is my sister's house.
As you got in that area from the residence of your sister at 34 Fairview Road, trees that you're talking about, where are they in relation to the property?
They're at the start of the property is the trees, and then their property begins.
And so the flagpole area and fire hydrant that you were talking about in earlier exhibits, is that in the same area as the trees?
Yes, it goes the trees and then the fire hydrant, then further up is the fire hydrant and the flagpole.
As you're coming down Fairview now, approaching 34 Fairview, the house would be on which side of the vehicle, on the driver's side or the passenger side?
The driver's side.
And as you approach that area where trees and flagpole and fire hydrant were, what, if anything, happens then?
We drive past the flagpole area, and all of a sudden Karen starts screaming, there he is, and she's banging to get out.
And banging on the door in the back seat.
Yes.
And at the time that she's saying this, were you able to see anything outside of the vehicle?
I saw nothing.
And what, if anything, when she's banging and kicking the door, banging on the door, what did Ms. Roberts?
Miss Roberts unlocked the door. Karen got out. Miss Roberts looked at me and said something like, she's crazy or she's batshit crazy, something like that.
And when the defendant gets out of the vehicle, where is it that she goes?
She just runs
And runs with?
straight to John.
And again, when she's running, at this point in time, can you see what she's running toward or where she's going or anything that she's talking about?
I was on the passenger side. So as I got out, she was already at John.
So she gets out and essentially makes a beeline over to where John was,
Correct.
and you're getting out of the passenger side, and by the time you come around the car, she's already there.
Yes.
And when she gets over there, what, if anything, could you see at that?
She straddles John and she lifts up his shirt, and then she lifted up her shirt and went to lay on him. And Miss Roberts went over and she was removing the snow from his face.
Let me take a step back from that just for a moment. And Your Honor, with the court's permission, I would ask to publish just a portion of what's been marked as Exhibit 12. Now, Ms. McCabe, I'm going to direct your attention up to the screen of what's been marked as Exhibit 12, and I know this is not something that pertains to your vehicle or anything else. But what I'm going to ask you as it plays through is if what you observed in this video is consistent with what you observed during the drive to Fairview Road that morning. It's going to be quick play. Now, as this video is running, Ms. McCabe, if I could just ask, what you see in this video, is that consistent with sort of the lighting and the conditions weather-wise that you observed when Ms. Roberts is driving from Meadows Ave to Fairview?
Yes.
you recognize whereabouts in the town of Canton, this perspective wise as far as what street?
Yes, that is Cassie. We just passed Cassie's corner store, and that is Chapman Street.
Again, Ms. McCabe, do you recognize whereabouts in the town of Canton we are in this portion of the video?
Yes, this is the top of Fairview.
So this will be from Chapman coming on to Fairview, is that correct?
Correct.
And prior to that, along that ride along Chapman, is that the period of time you were looking out the window and trying to see if you can see John on the side of the road?
Yes, but we didn't drive that way.
You came from the other direction?
Yes, yes.
What's up on the screen and what you just observed as far as the drive down Fairview, is that fair and accurate material consistent with what you observed and Ms. Roberts was driving down that morning?
Yes,
And at this point in time, as you're coming sort of down the hill from Fairview, is this point that the conversation occurs as far as mother and prior dating relationships and things like that?
a little bit more towards the top of the street,
So tell us mother was more closer to the top of my cabinet.
midway down. Yes,
The vehicle in the roadway there, do you recognize that?
yes.
And what do you recognize that to be?
Miss Roberts.
For clarification purposes, with the laser pointer, if you could direct your attention where you're seeing power. Now, the area where you observed Mr. O'Keefe, can you see that in this particular frame of the video?
Not in this frame. I cannot. It's not clear.
You see that area now?
Yes.
I'm just going to be good like this for. If you could, fast forward just about. Okay, do you recognize any of the individuals up on that screen?
Yes.
And if you could, with the laser pointer, direct your attention.
Carrie Roberts, myself, Karen Reed.
Ms. McCabe, if I could just take you back to when you arrived there. We get in, Ms. Reed goes over to Mr. O'Keefe, Ms. Roberts. What is it that you were doing at that time?
I got out of the car and I came around, and for a second or two, I completely just froze. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. And then Carrie and I made eye contact, and I called 911. And Carrie was asking me to go to the car and get, she was yelling to get towels or blankets or something out of the back of our car.
Is that why the back of the car is opened up in the video that we just saw in reference to Ms. Roberts' vehicle?
Yes,
Did she direct you sort of where to go within the vehicle to find the blankets, towels, wherever it was?
yes,
Now, you called 911, you spoke to the operator and told them essentially where you were, correct?
yes.
Now, as far as that initial, what you saw, that you froze and couldn't believe what you saw, can you describe to the jury what it was that you saw?
I saw Carrie wiping the snow off of John's face, and I could not believe that that was John laying there.
And how was John positioned, or how was his body positioned when you saw
He was just laying flat on his back.
it? And as far as the snow Ms. Roberts was wiping off his face, was there any other snow on his body at that time?
Yes,
If you know about how much?
there was enough that his body was covered in snow.
Could you tell at that point how far Mr. O'Keefe was from the roadway as far as Fairview Road was concerned?
I mean, I remember kind of a little ways in. I don't know exactly.
And so you make that call to 911, and what is sort of going on with respect to Ms. Roberts, the defendant, and Mr. O'Keefe while you're on that 911?
So I run the blankets over to Miss Roberts, and she's kind of lifts him up, put the blankets underneath him, and she's screaming at Miss Reed to get off of Mr. O'Keefe. And they're kind of yelling back and forth. Karen's screaming, "Is he dead? Is he dead?" I, at some points, walk over towards the car, Carrie's car, to get away because they're so loud. And I was trying to be calm and get help there for John as fast as possible. Carrie starts yelling about doing CPR. She tells Karen to do mouth to mouth. Karen's yelling because as they start, blood starts coming out of John's mouth.
As far as the CPR, that's what you're talking about?
Yes.
So during this time, the defendant's yelling and you're on the phone with 911, correct?
Yes.
So you're trying to back up or distance yourself a little bit so that you can hear what's going on with the 911 operator and they can hear you.
Yes.
And after you complete that 911 call, what's going on with that?
I go over, and at that point, Carrie asks if I can take over doing the compressions.
Did you do that?
I did, yes.
And at some point after you call 911 to either police or fire or someone responds and arrives on scene, is that correct?
Yes.
You know about how much time it was in between when you hung up with 911 and when the first responders started to arrive?
When I hung up, maybe a few minutes. I'm not exactly sure.
And do you recall whether or not it was police or fire or who showed up first?
Police.
Is that the officer that was in that video or that cruiser that was just up on the screens last?
I didn't see the officer, in the video, but I know it was Officer Saraf was the first officer to arrive.
So then, after the officer arrives, what happened?
He was trying to figure out what had happened. Karen just ran around screaming my name, Carrie's name. Is he dead? Is he dead? It was on repeat. Could I have hit him? Did I hit him? More officers started to arrive. The EMTs, they began to work on him.
And while him, and by him you mean Mr. O'Keefe?
Yes.
And Mr. O'Keefe's still on the ground and they're working on him there, is that correct?
Yes.
Did you see anything about sort of what they were doing or what was going on with that?
No, I just saw a bunch of them around Mr. O'Keefe.
And then what happened
then? More officers began to arrive. Miss Reed just continued to run around screaming. As more officers and EMT arrived, they asked what happened. One EMT asked, one EMT had asked, his name, his age, things like that. If she knew what happened, Miss Reed stated that she hit him. Besides running around saying, I hit him, did I hit him, could I have done this? Is he dead? Is he dead? At one point, one of the police officers put Miss Reed in the back of a cruiser, and he asked for myself to go over with her, and Carrie came over with us as well.
If I could just take you back to when the paramedic is asking for information, biographical information, things like that. You indicated that the defendant said, I hit him, is that correct?
Yes.
That's something that she said once or more than once?
3 times. I hit him, I hit him, I hit him.
Now, before you had made reference to statements she made with sort of qualifiers or questions as far as could I have hit him or did I hit him? Is that what she said at that time when she was speaking to the paramedic?
No, she was earlier. It was could I, did I? When she spoke to the paramedic, it was crystal clear. I hit him.
Now, one of the officers takes her over to the back of a cruiser, is that right?
Yes.
You were over in that area as well?
Yes.
Who, if anyone else, was over in that area?
Miss Roberts.
And while you were over in that area, what was going on over there?
We were in the back of the police cruiser. Karen was sitting in there. I kind of scooched myself in. Miss Roberts came over. Karen grabbed our hands. She asked us to pray. She looked at her hands and she had blood. She asked us if she could have gotten her period. We told her no, that was John's blood. Then she said, what if he's dead? Promise me you'll take care of the kids. Someone's going to take care of the kids. Then we prayed. Then at the end, they were moving John. And at that point, Karen told Kerry, go over, look, is he dead? Is he dead? Is he dead? Over and over. And Kerry said, I'll go over and check on him. And she was yelling, are they working on him? And then at that point, she grabbed my hands and she said, Google hypothermia, Google how long it takes to die in the cold. And so I had my phone out and it was cold and my hands were frozen and I have MS, and I took my phone out while she was screaming and shaking my arm, and I attempted to Google how long does it take to die in the cold.
And when you conducted that search, that was at the defendant's request on scene sometime after 6 a.m. on that day, correct?
Yes.
You recall whether or not that came up as far as your search in Google? Is it something that you typed once or more than once?
I believe I did it multiple times because as I was typing it, I don't know what else was coming up. She was screaming. My hands were shaking.
And do you recall anything as far as what the search results were, or did you click on anything, or did you get an answer to the question the defendant had posed to you?
I don't even think I got an answer because as I kept Googling and she kept yelling, and then they were moving John. And the next thing I knew, we were kind of moving because she wanted to see if they were working on him.
So you were moving along with the defendant over towards where Mr. O'Keefe had gone to the back of the ambulance?
Yes, we kind of just moved to see what was going on.
When you moved over, what did you see then?
They were just putting him in the back of the ambulance.
Now, after Mr. O'Keefe was put into the back of the ambulance, where did you go then? What did you do?
At that point, different police officers, I believe, were arriving, and they were asking questions about what happened.
And did you speak to those officers?
I did, yes.
And at that point, did you know what happened?
No, to be honest, it was like I was there, but everything was just going on, and I was completely just in a state of shock and disbelief.
And that sort of period there, how long did that go on?
So I talked to a few officers. We tried to just give them, he didn't come home. We went out looking for him, kind of just the brief overview. And then one of the police officers asked me to go into the house and to wake up my sister and my brother-in-law.
And at some point while you were outside, did you try to contact your sister and your brother-in-law?
I believe I called my sister, Nicole.
And when was that in relation to everything as far as medically that was going on with Mr. O'Keefe and all?
I think I might have called her right after I got off with 911 possibly. And then, she didn't answer. And that's when I was walking over, I believe, to John.
And she didn't answer the call when you called her initially?
No.
And you recall calling either your sister, Nicole, or your brother-in-law, Brian Albert, prior to going into the house?
I don't recall. I know I did call Nicole at one point. I'm not sure if I called Brian or not.
Regardless of if you called or you didn't call, do you recall having any sort of phone conversation with either Nicole or Brian Albert before you went in the house?
No.
So you at least called your sister, Nicole, she didn't answer, and then one of the officers directed you to wake them up.
Yes.
And when you went up to the house at 34 Fairview, how did you get in?
The front door.
And front door was unlocked?
Yes.
Is that typical from your experience at that residence?
Yes.
And so you went to the house, and where did you go?
I went up the stairs to their bedroom.
And bedroom door, when you arrived there, was it open or closed or something?
Closed.
And you opened it?
Yes.
And when you opened it, who, if anyone, did you see in the room, and what were they doing?
I saw my sister and Brian, and they were both asleep.
And you familiar with a dog that they have?
Yes.
What was the dog's name?
Chloe?
Was Chloe in the bedroom as well at that time?
I don't recall.
You come in, they're both sleeping, and what happened there?
I go over to the bed and I'm calling out their names.
And how long were you calling out their names before you got any kind of response?
Brian responded first and he was very, startled and looked at me like, what is going on? Nicole took a little, and, I think it took Cole a little bit longer than Brian to wake up.
And what is it that you're telling them as you're coming into?
I'm telling them that we just found John out front, and I could have possibly said, John has died. We just found John out front. They were very confused. At one point, I think Brian was like, who's John? I mean, they just woken up and they had no idea what I was talking about.
Now, as far as when they're first waking up and you're explaining to them, how would you describe sort of their demeanor as you're talking?
They were both shocked. I think they thought, like, why? Okay.
What I'm asking them is just sort of when you observe them, how would you describe your physical observations of what they look like, their demeanor in that?
Shocked, confused, not understanding.
Objection, move to strike.
Like the last one.
Now, as far as this conversation that you're having with your sister and your brother-in-law in their bed, how long was that going on?
A few minutes at least.
And then following that, where did you go?
They got up, got dressed, and then we walked down the stairs.
And when you got to the bottom of the stairs, what, if anything, did you see?
There was a police officer at the bottom of the stairs.
And do you know who that police officer is?
Yes, Officer Lank.
At that time, did you know who that police officer was?
I did, yes.
How did you know?
He's from Canton. He was, 5 years older than me. I knew him kind of growing up, who he was, and met him through the years. Yes.
And were there any other officers with him initially?
No.
Now, before you go into the house, do you know where Ms. Roberts and the defendant were, or what they were doing when you went to the house?
I believe they put Karen in a car, and
Only if you know.
okay.
If you know. Do you know?
Karen was in a car. Harry was walking all around.
Now, as far as the ambulance with Mr. O'Keefe, at the time that you go into the house, was that ambulance still there?
I'm not 100% sure, but I believe it had left.
And when you come downstairs with your sister and your brother-in-law, and the officer's there, you have a conversation, is that correct?
Yes.
Where did that first conversation occur?
In the hallway and then into the kitchen.
And from there, you mentioned that there was Officer Lank at one point. Were there any other officers that joined that conversation at some point?
Hours later, yes.
And so during that initial conversation, you're talking to the officer, who, if anyone else, not what they said, but who, if anyone else, is speaking to the officer.
Brian and Nicole.
Conversation initially with the officer, you know about how long that went on?
I don't. A few minutes.
And following that conversation, what did you do, or what happened?
My husband arrived.
And had you called him?
Yes.
And when had you called him?
I called him when I was walking in the house to wake up my sister and Brian.
As you're walking in, you call your husband Matt, and then he arrives at some point after you're done talking to the officer, or while you're talking?
The officer was still in the house, yes.
And so in that vein, as far as when your husband comes in, the officer's there, correct?
Yes.
Did you see your husband talking to the officer as well?
Yes. The officer asked him to step outside or step to the side, and they spoke.
And then what happened then?
The officer told me to stay. The officer told me to stay, and that he said that the state police would be coming to talk to me.
So you stayed at the house at 34 Fairview, is that right?
Yes.
You know where Ms. Roberts and the defendant?
Yes. Carrie came up and she had told me that
At some point, did you see Ms. Roberts and the defendant go?
yes, to pick up John's parents.
As far as they left in Ms. Roberts' car, is that right?
Correct.
Ms. Roberts was again driving.
Correct.
And at some point, did you observe them come back to the house?
Yes.
About how long was it between the time they left and the time they came back?
5 minutes approximately.
And after they came back to the house, what, if any, other activity did you see outside as far as first response?
I was in the house, so I didn't see Miss Roberts pull back up.
You were in the house for most of the rest of the time that you were there, is that correct?
Correct.
How long were you there that morning, waiting for the state police?
I believe I left approximately 11:30.
During the time that you were there, you're there, your sister Nicole Albert's there, your brother-in-law Brian Albert's there, and your husband Matthew McCabe's there, correct?
Correct.
Was there anybody else that arrived at some point over the course of the morning while you were there at the house?
Yes,
And who was that? And if you know about what time was it that they arrived?
Julie Albert.
Now, with reference to when Julie Albert arrived, at some point around that time, did you have occasion to look out and see sort of what was going on outside?
No,
Were you aware whether or not there were any police or fire or anything that was still there at the time that Miss Julie Albert arrived?
there wasn't.
And she comes in the house, and at some point, I'm assuming she's informed of what had transpired there before her arrival, correct?
Yeah, yes.
And when she's informed of that, what, if anything, did you observe about her demeanor or how she reacted?
Shocked.
Now, in addition to Julie Albert, who, if anyone else, was at the house that morning while you were there?
Officer Lank and Gallagher were there. And Brian Higgins came that morning.
And do you know how Brian Higgins came to know or how Brian Higgins came to be there that morning?
I don't know.
Now, you mentioned that Officer Lank came back to the house, is that right?
Yes,
That was after some period of time when he had left.
yes,
He came back with another officer named Gallagher, is that right?
yes.
And why did they come back to the house?
Because I called Officer Lank.
And did you have his number, or how did you get his number if you did?
Julie Albert gave it to me.
And so you called Officer Lank, he then comes back to the house on Fairview, is that right?
Yes.
And when he came back, what is it that why had you asked him to come?
Well, as I was sitting there and I was waiting for the state police to come, I was slowly trying to piece together what had just happened in the last couple of hours. And he had told me, if there's anything that you remember, if you remember anything, please, give me a call.
And so there was something that you remembered and you gave it.
Yes.
And when he came back to the house, what was it that you told him?
I told him about the comments and the remarks that Karen Reed had been stating that morning.
And specifically, what type of remarks are you referring to that you told Officer Lank when he came back?
I said that she told one of the EMTs that she hit him.
Now, at some point, you indicated that you left the house on Fairview, is that right?
Yes,
And with your husband, I presume?
yes.
And where did the two of you go?
We went home.
And your children were still there without you or your husband there, is that correct?
Yes.
And once you arrived back home, what is it that you did at that point?
We went in the house and Officer Proctor was coming over to speak with us.
And that Officer Proctor, is that someone that you knew previously or had ever met?
I had never met Officer Proctor.
Did he come alone or was he with someone else?
He had another officer with him. Yes, Yuri Buchanan. No.
When you get home, how long was it at the time from when you arrived home with your husband to the time that the officers from the state police came?
It was pretty quick.
Now, in addition to the officers from the state police, did anybody else come over to your house on that day, morning, early afternoon?
Yes, my brother-in-law, Brian.
And do you know why he came over that?
Yes, he came over. I had asked him, he's like a big brother to me, and I was all shaken up and nervous and overwhelmed, and so I wanted his support.
And he obliged and he came over, correct?
Yes,
Now, at some point after the officers from the state police came over, you spoke to them, is that correct?
yes,
And do you recall where in your home you spoke to them?
in my dining room.
When you spoke to them, was it both of the officers that were present?
Yes,
And was there anybody else present in the dining room when you were talking?
no,
And as far as your husband or your brother-in-law, Brian, do you know where in the house they were when you were in the dining room?
yes, they were in my bedroom.
And at some point later on that day, those same officers talked to both your husband and your brother-in-law, Brian.
Yes,
And during each of those respective conversations or interviews, do you know where you were in the house when those were going on?
in my bedroom.
And when you were in your bedroom, could you hear anything that they were saying downstairs in the dining room?
No.
May I have a moment, Your Honor?
Yes.
Approach, Your Honor.
Yes.
I'm showing you two separate pages.
Okay.
Do you recognize each of those documents and what the content is?
Yes,
And those are essentially, one contains text messages that morning of the 29th between yourself and Ms. Reed, correct?
yes,
And the other one is sort of the list of phone calls between yourself and Ms. Reed from that morning as well.
yes,
Before I get into those, as far as after you had gone inside the house and Ms. Reed had got into Ms. Roberts' car, what if any other communication or what if any other communication did you have?
I texted her asking for Carrie's phone number because I didn't have it. And I also had a phone conversation with Karen when she was in the ambulance.
And that text communication that I placed before you essentially has one bubble on it, and that's you asking for Carrie Roberts' number.
Correct.
And the phone conversation that you had with the defendant, when was that, and you know where the defendant was at the time that you spoke?
Yes, she was in an ambulance.
And if you could describe to the jury sort of what, generally speaking, what was the content of that conversation? What did the two of you talk about?
She just was repeating, asking if he was dead. Is he dead? She brought up the kids, and then she also asked if I would visit her.
And how did you respond?
I said yes.
Following that phone conversation, did you have any further communication in any form that you can recall with the defendant?
No.
May I approach?
Yes. Objection, Mr. Jackson?
94. Just a couple more questions, ma'am. You had asked defendant Ms. Reed for Ms. Roberts' information because you didn't have it, correct?
Correct.
And at some point, did you receive that information from the defendant?
No.
And did you receive that information from any other source?
I must have, but I don't recall how.
And as far as asking for Ms. Roberts' information, why were you asking?
She was on the way to pick up John's parents and to bring him to the hospital. And I wanted to check in on them and then further updates from Carrie about John and how he was.
You wanted to know how your friend was doing, correct?
Yes.
No further questions for this witness.
4 minutes before, I think we're way too much.
I don't think I can get it done in 4 minutes.
All right, John, I'm going to, we're not in session on Monday, so we'll come back Tuesday morning. So Tuesday will be a half a day. Someday next week, I might ask you to think about maybe revising some of these Tuesday, Thursdays to longer days, but I'll give you plenty of notice of that. I need to make sure that the board, I'm just asking you to think, right? So please, those same cautions, do not discuss this case with anyone. Don't do any independent research or investigation into this case. If you happen to see, hear, or read anything about this case, please disregard it and leave everything here, literally, figuratively. Clear your heads and we'll see you fresh Tuesday. All right, so I'll see counsel at sidebar about scheduling.